Family is forever. I fumbled through my mountain of comic books, trying to find my favorite issue of Bloodslaughter, without much luck. "Come on, Yaz, you're taking forever," my best friend Quinny moaned from the beanbag chair in the corner. I stuck my middle finger up at her without looking up. Erin laughed, while nosing through my collection of video games. Quinny had been my best friend for about 4 years. We were both the outcasts of our school, due to us being interested in nerdy comics, horror films, video games, and heavy music instead of following what the popular girls liked. Quinny was quite tall, with long brown hair, glasses, and silver braces. She wore red trainers, ripped dark blue skinny jeans, and a baggy red and black jumper with a character from our favorite horror film, Wake the Dead, in large print on the front. Erin had been our friend for about a year. She used to live in London, but moved to our town after her mum got tired of city life and finally saved up enough to move. She also shared our passion of nerdy things. Erin was short, with long, snowy blonde hair. She wore purple trainers with scuffs and holes, black leggings, and a white hoodie with a demon print on the back. I was about the same height as Quinny, with long, thick, light red hair. I was wearing black trainers with ripped black skinny jeans and a hoodie of my favorite band, Heaven's Gone. We live in Handleshire, a small town in a rural part of England. You get the occasional market or fair that comes up, but it's mostly a very uneventful place to live. Quinny sighed and pushed her glasses back up her nose. She wriggled around in the beanbag until her legs were in the air and her head on the floor. I rolled my eyes. "Are you sure you have it?" Quinny piped up again. "Yes, because it's taking ages to find." "Shut up, Quinny." I finally locked eyes with the familiar cover art. "Ta-da!" I exclaimed, plucking it from the pile. Quinny spun herself back upright, her long brown hair getting swept into her face as she fumbled about on the beanbag. "Brilliant," she smiled, taking the comic from me and sliding it into her bag. "I'll give it back next weekend." Erin stretched across my bed to reach her bag, before pulling out a board game. "Should we play Witch's Cauldron?" We must have been playing for hours, because suddenly there was a knock at my bedroom door. "Yaz, we're going out." My dad poked his head round the door. "Are you guys staying the night?" he asked Erin and Quinny. "If that's okay, Mr. Blanks," Erin replied. "Of course, call me Dan." My dad smiled. "I'll leave you some money so you guys can order a pizza." We thanked him and said goodbye, my mum yelling her farewells from downstairs. "What time is it?" Quinny asked, fumbling around in her pockets for her phone. "Fucking hell, it's 6 already," Erin replied. "Shall we order some food then?" Quinny asked. "I'm starving." "Greedy bitch," I laughed. "Greedy witch," Erin chuckled, holding up the witch figure from the game. We all laughed. I picked up my phone and began ordering us a pizza from our local chain. The rest of the evening was spent eating pizza and playing our board game until 11 o'clock came around. "Ooh, let's watch a horror film," Erin suggested. "Which one?" I asked her. "We can watch it on the big TV in the living room." We migrated to the living room and Quinny began flicking through the giant list of horror films the streaming site had to offer. I went into the kitchen to grab some drinks and snacks. "Found one," Quinny yelled. "It's about a sea monster invasion." "That sounds so terrible," Erin laughed. "It's only got a rating of 2. "Alright, fine," Quinny sighed, continuing her quest to find us a decent movie. "Then what about this?" "Oh, Invasion of the Other Kind. I've heard about this one. It's meant to be awesome," Erin cheered. We all sat on the couch as Quinny hit play. It was an older movie with a slow and menacing intro tune. The scene cut to a small American house on a cornfield. In the background loomed a dark, ominous figure. "It's the alien," whispered Erin. The scene then cut to the inside of the house. A man wearing a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and a farmer hat was sat in a chair in front of a TV, with only static showing. The camera angle changed to reveal that the man had been hollowed out. Erin grimaced. "Ew, yuck." She stuck her tongue out. Brilliant special effects, though. We continued watching. About 45 minutes went by and I suddenly needed the toilet. I told Quinny to pause it. "No," Quinny rolled her eyes. "Just piss yourself. This is a good bit." I jumped on her and threatened to relieve myself on her if she didn't hit pause. Quinny obeyed. I hop off the couch and began walking down the dimly lit hallway to the downstairs toilet. I complete my mission, and as I'm washing my hands, I heard a loud bang. What the fuck? I muttered out loud. I unlock the bathroom door and quickly go back to the living room to see what the evil presences I call friends were up to. What the fuck were you doing in there? Quinny asked me. Yeah, Erin laughed. We thought you'd broke the toilet. I looked at them puzzled. That noise wasn't me. We all looked towards the stairs. Maybe something fell over in your room? Erin suggested. Go look, Quinny told her. No, Erin hissed. Yaz can look. It's her house. We can all look, I piped up. I ain't going up there. Are you mad? Erin laughed. Then stay down here, I tell her. It's usually the ones who stay behind that get killed anyways. Erin followed me up the stairs, along with Quinny. We slowly pushed my bedroom door open and turned on the light. Nothing was out of place. Maybe it was your parents' room? Quinny asked. Shh, I whispered. We all stood still as we heard a faint scuffling sound from outside. What the fuck? Quinny was cut off by a sudden loud knock at the front door. We all jumped. I quickly turned the bedroom light off. Why did you do that? Erin hissed. I don't want them to know we're home, I whispered back. Yaz, are you thick? The living room's lit up like Christmas, Erin panicked. Quinny took a breath. Guys, calm down, she told us. It might just be Yaz's parents. A slight relief washed over me before I realized they would use their key. Let's go downstairs and look, I whispered. The three of us tiptoed to the stairs and slowly made our way down, being careful not to disturb the creaky steps. We got on our hands and knees and crawled into the living room. Thankfully, my parents had drawn the curtains before they left so nobody could see in. I reached up and turned off the lamp. Quinny had snuck off to the window without my knowledge. She peeked through the gap in the curtain. There's a man outside, she reported. Tall, short hair, wearing a t-shirt. Quinny, get down, I hissed. The man knocked on the door again. Go away, Erin whispered quietly. We don't want anything. The knocking continued. I didn't know what to do, so I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my parents in our group chat, explaining the situation. My mum replied almost instantly. We're on our way back. Be 10 minutes. Find somewhere to hide and stay calm. I told Quinny and Erin what my mum said, and we all took refuge behind the couch. We all jumped at the sound of a key in the lock. The front door opened and in walked my parents, their friend Sasha following behind. Sasha and my dad both belong to the same boxing club, and they all regularly go out for meals and drinks together. My mum fumbled around for the light switch. Yaz? Down here, I called back. The room lit up and the three of us sheepishly climbed up from our hiding space. What's happened then? My dad asked. I told him again and explained how the knocking stopped about 2 minutes ago. My mum sat on the couch with us, trying to calm us down as Quinny began a vague description of the man. As she was talking, we heard the knocking begin again. Stay in the living room, my dad told us as he and Sasha crept towards the door. I craned my neck over the arm of the sofa so I could see. Who's there? My dad yelled firmly. We heard a voice outside, but couldn't make out what he was saying. My dad walked up to the door, moving the potted plant aside to look through the thin window to the side of the door. His expression went from anger to shock. My dad didn't say a word. He simply stepped in front of the door and opened it. Lucas, he began. The man smiled a wide smile. Hi, Dad. We were all sat in the living room. Sasha was in the kitchen, putting the kettle on. The man sat in our dark gray armchair, staring intently at my parents. Lucas, where have you been? My mum choked. The man shook his head. It doesn't matter. I'm here now. My mum was tearing up at this point. Me, Quinny, and Erin sat on the corner sofa, exchanging glances. My dad broke the silence. Yasmin, this is your older brother Lucas. You were only a baby when he... My dad trailed off. It's been 14 years. Lucas looked at me. I remember you. His expression was vacant. Sasha reappeared, carrying a tray of hot beverages. She placed it on the coffee table before taking a seat on the footrest. This is Sasha, my mum said. She's a family friend who does boxing classes with your dad. Sasha gave him a warm smile. Nice to meet you. Lucas simply nodded. And this is Aaron and Quinny, Yaz's friends, my mum continued. Aaron and Quinny waved politely. Lucas simply nodded again. He then looked around. Where's Baxter? My parents looked confused. Baxter was a Labrador we had when I was a baby. Lucas, Baxter passed away. He was 10 when you... My dad trailed off again. Lucas seemed confused at this, but he exhaled heavily and forced a smile. Very well. He looked around the room, perplexed. What's that? He asked, pointing to the corner of the room. Oh, that's a housemate, my mum told him. You can ask it to play music and things like that. Lucas stared at it for a long time. Have you never seen one before? My mum asked. No, Lucas replied, confused. He looked around the room again. I'd like to go to my room now, if that's okay. My parents looked at each other. We'll make some sleeping arrangements. I don't have a room? My dad raised an eyebrow. Lucas, you've been gone for nearly 15 years. Yaz took your room when she was 8. We waited so long for you to return, but nothing ever came up despite everything. We've kept most of your belongings. They're in the attic. We just couldn't deal with the pain and had to move on in a healthy way. Lucas looked at him with a hurt expression. So you forgot about me. My mum started crying again. We never forgot you, Lukey. We never did. Of course we didn't, my dad added. We held on to hope for so many years. We never gave up looking. But there was just no sign, not a trace. You were practically declared dead for Christ's sake. We still don't know where you've been. We need to call the police. Lucas leaned forward. No, I don't want to talk to police. It's okay. I will sleep in the spare room. I really think we should call them. You're still a missing person. They need to know. My dad was cut off by Lucas, who put his hand up and firmly stated, no. Well, doctors at least. We need to get you checked over. We need to make sure that... Dad, I'm fine. Lucas smiled, his expression softening. I just want to rest and get to know everyone. I do not want to involve the police or doctors or anyone. Let's just let him settle, Sasha spoke up, sipping her tea. We can deal with the logistics another day. For now, just let him be comfortable. My dad nodded. My mum shook her head, drying her eyes again. I just can't believe it's been 14 years. I never thought I'd see you again. I've always dreamt this day would come, but in my heart I never thought it would. You were our 9-year-old little boy when you disappeared. Now a 23-year-old man has sat in front of me and we've lost so much time. My mum dabbed her eyes with her tissue. My dad squeezed her hand. We will make up for lost time, Mum. Lucas smiled. He took a drink from the tray on the table and sipped it. He then perched his lips, raising an eyebrow at the mug. Very bitter. I can grab you some milk and sugar if you'd like. Sasha got up from the footrest. I wasn't sure who wanted black tea and who wanted milky. Your parents are very different in their tea drinking tastes. It's fine, Lucas told her, taking another sip. I like it. Sasha looked at the clock on the wall. Blimey, look at the time, she exclaimed. I'd best get back home. My husband will think I've ran off. Is there anything I could do before I go? Thank you, Sasha. You've done more than enough for us. My mum smiled. Text us when you're home safe. Mum looked at us. Best you lot be getting to bed too. We nodded, bid everyone good night, and headed up to my room and going to bed. Quinny, are you awake? I whispered into the darkness. Yeah, Quinny whispered from her sleeping bag on the floor. Aaron, are you? Yes. I rolled to the side of my bed to face them. The light from the full moon lit up my room enough to see them both. Tonight was wild. Quinny sat up and rested her back against the wall. You can say that again, Erin said, her sleeping bag rustling as she turned. You never told us much about your brother. I never knew much, I told her. All I know is I was a baby when it happened. Mum and Dad were in the house and Lucas was playing outside in the garden. Then next minute he was gone. What do you think happened? Quinny asked. My parents always thought he was kidnapped, I replied. They never let me play outside unsupervised when I was younger. That's horrible, Erin whispered. Anyways, I need a wee, I announced, throwing the covers off and stepping over the sleeping bag strewn across my bedroom floor. I entered the bathroom and unzipped my onesie. Once finished, I headed over to the sink and washed my hands, chucking some water over my face. What a night, I whispered to myself. I unlocked the door and turned left into the darkness, then jumped. Lucas stood in front of me. He wore only his blue jeans, no shirt or shoes. His short black hair was slicked backwards. Hello, sister, he smiled. Hi, Lucas, I replied awkwardly. He chuckled. They never used to call me Lucas. He nodded towards my parents' room. I was always Lukey. Oh, yeah? Yeah, I can't sleep, and judging by all the whispering, I assumed you couldn't either. I looked at him sheepishly. He just chuckled. I remember the paper-thin walls. You used to keep me up all night crying. He smiled at me. Lucas stepped aside and I began to walk past him, but he gently put his hand on my shoulder. Do you ever play in the woods outside, just over our garden fence? He asked. I was confused. Not really, no. Why? Just curious. He released my shoulder and disappeared into the bathroom. I stood there for a second, taken back by his unusual question, but ultimately decided to just go back to bed. I woke up around 9 to Quinny letting out an ungodly fart. You're absolutely fucking disgusting. Get out of my house, I yelled. Erin burst into laughter. We chatted for a while before getting dressed and heading downstairs. My dad was already up making pancakes. Morning, Mr. Blanks. Oh, I mean Dan. Erin caught herself. Morning, girls. I've made you some pancakes. I assumed you were all up from the commotion from your room? He joked. How did you sleep? I asked him. My dad sighed. Not very well, to be honest, my dad replied. He placed a large stack of pancakes on the dining room table and told us to help ourselves. We grabbed our plates and began drowning our breakfast in syrup. My dad sat at the table with us, placing his mug of black coffee in front of him. I called the police this morning, just between us, he said in a hushed tone. I just had to let them know he's come home. I don't know if they're going to investigate, but it would just make us look bizarre if people saw him out and about while still being a missing person. Probably for the best, I replied through mouthfuls of pancakes. He sipped his coffee. So, how'd you lot sleep? Sunday afternoon went by uneventfully. Quinny and Erin went home at 3, and I spent the rest of the day reading comics. 6 o'clock came around, and my mum called me for dinner. I sat in my usual spot at the dining room table across from Lucas. He didn't say anything, just stared intently out the large kitchen window. Been up to much today? I asked him. I went out, Lucas replied with a smile. Went for a walk around the town. Has much changed? A bit. My mum placed a large dish in the middle of the table. Pasta bake. Does anyone want a drink? We all finished our plates. I took my empty plate to the dishwasher, thanked my mum for dinner, and went back to my room. Lucas hadn't moved when I left. A couple of hours passed and I decided to have a shower. I grabbed my towel from my drawer, picked out some berry-scented shower gel, and headed to the bathroom. I pushed the door open with my foot to find Lucas staring at himself in the mirror. Whoa, sorry, I exclaimed, startled. Don't be, Lucas replied, not breaking eye contact from his stone-faced reflection. You all good? I asked him. Is anyone all good? I guess not. I backed out of the bathroom and went back to my room, deciding to just pass on the shower to avoid another awkward conversation. I put on my onesie and lay on my bed, texting the group chat of me, Quinny, and Erin. Monday tomorrow. Ugh, Erin texted. I know, how shit, Quinny replied. How's your brother, Yaz? He's unusual. I guess whatever happened to him was fucked up, so I can't blame him, I told her. I bet, Erin replied. I decided to get some water before calling it a night. I walked down the creaky staircase into the kitchen and grabbed a cold bottle of water from the fridge. As I walked past the living room, I heard strange sounds, like fast whispers. I stopped to listen, but couldn't make out what was being said. The living room was dark, which made things even weirder. I slowly opened the door and turned on the lights to find Lucas stood there by himself. Oh, I muttered. Hello, sister. Lucas smiled. Sorry, I just heard weird noises in here. Paper-thin walls, Lucas grinned. I nodded. Good night. I turned off the light and shut the door, clutching my bottle of water to my chest. I tried to tell myself not to judge. My brother had clearly been through hell, and he'd get better as time went on. I pushed everything to the back of my mind and went to bed. It was a sunny Monday lunchtime, and me, Quinny, and Erin tucked ourselves away behind some trees on the school field to eat our lunch and play a card game. Dragon hell. I cast the spell of fires of hell, Erin exclaimed, laying her card on the grass. Void, I chuckled. I counter that with demon sin. Fires of hell don't affect those who come from hell. I pick up her card. For fuck's sake, Erin cursed. Huh? What's that guy doing? Quinny pointed out, through a mouthful of sandwich. We followed her gaze to the school gates at the other end of the field. Is that Lucas? I squinted my eyes to get a better look. My heart dropped. It is. What the fucking fuck? Why is your brother staring at a school? Quinny asked me. I don't know, and I don't want to find out, I snapped. I began packing up my things. Hey, take it easy, Quinny told me, putting her hands up. He can't see us here. If you want to remain inconspicuous, then let's stay here. I looked around. She was right. It would be hard to see us from the playground, let alone from the other side of the field. I looked back to the school gates to see if Lucas had seen me, but he was gone. It is a bit weird though, isn't it? I'm not just being a bitch, I asked them. Yeah, it's creepy, Quinny replied. Oh, come on, guys, Erin piped up. Have sympathy. He's probably just looking at what his old school looks like now. Erin's words calmed me down. Yeah, actually, you're probably right. The bell rang, signaling the end of break, so we packed up our things and walked back across the field. The rest of the day went by, and the three of us began walking the short journey home. Well, I've got a load of homework that I've put off for ages, so I'm gonna get on that, but we can play online later. See you both tomorrow. Quinny waved goodbye as she crossed the road into her street. Yeah, and I've got to do chores. My mom said she'll buy me the Soul Harvest 2 game if I clean the house. Erin skipped off in excitement up the hill to her house. I carried on walking down the road, fumbling my keys out of my pocket. I let myself in the front door and dumped my school bag in the hallway. Hi, Yaz. How was school? My mom called. Fine, I shout back. I flop myself on the living room couch and switch on cartoons. About an hour went by when there was a knock at the door. Can you get that, Yaz? My mom called. I sighed dramatically, pulling myself off the couch and to the door. I turned the handle to open it and was shocked to see 2 police officers stood on our doorstep. Hello, are your parents in? The male officer asked me. I stammered, yes, they're... let me go get them. I turned around and ran up the stairs. My mum was in a room folding laundry, and my dad was in the bathroom. The police are here, I tell my mum. What? She asked me, confused. I heard the sound of the toilet flush and some rustling in the bathroom, then my dad appeared. You told them then? My mum looked at him. I had to, Tess. What else could we do? My mother nodded in acceptance. No, you're right. Let's go and see them. They'll probably want to interview Lucas once he's back from his walk. My parents went downstairs and led the officers to the living room. I stayed upstairs on the landing, craning my neck to see downstairs. The female officer spoke first. Mr. and Mrs. Blanks, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but remains have been found in the woods outside your house. We believe it to be Lucas. What? That can't be right. He was only here a few hours ago, my dad choked. I think you've got the wrong person, my mum added. We'll come and identify the body, and then we'll show you it's a mistake. The officers sounded confused. Mrs. Blanks, you must understand there's no body to identify. Your son went missing 14 years ago. Well, that can't be him then. Our son came home on Saturday. He's an adult. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. The police officers looked at my parents with confusion and sympathy. This doesn't make sense. The male officer raised his eyebrow. We've matched dental records and DNA evidence provided from the toys and clothes given when the case opened. It's a direct match. My dad put his hand up. Tell me exactly what's going on. Why did nobody find anything for all these years? That woods was searched inside out. The female officer sighed. Some young kids snuck through a hole in the fence and down the road by the river to explore the woods behind the gardens. They saw a bag hanging from a tree, so were curious and looked inside. The clothes and toy inside there were somehow perfectly preserved. They matched the description you gave of your son the day he went missing. A red shirt, dungarees, and a dinosaur teddy. "This isn't right," my dad exclaimed. "I know my son. The boy, the man that showed up on my doorstep is my son. Same eyes, same hair color, same scar on his cheek from a bike accident, same sticky out ears." The officers looked at each other, concerned. "Where is this person now?" "He's out," my mum told them, barely holding herself together. "He went out for a walk." I crept back upstairs, my head spinning. Who was this man, and why did he perfectly resemble my brother? I quietly entered my room and pulled my phone out of my pocket. I texted the group chat everything I'd overheard. I heard the front door shut, so I walked downstairs to see my parents. They were still sat on the couch, looking pale. "What happened?" I asked them. My mum didn't answer. My dad told me as best as he could. I sat with them on the sofa. A haze of confusion clouded over us as we tried to figure out what was going on. I then heard the stairs creak. "Mum, Dad, who was that?" Lucas slowly came down the stairs and stood in the doorway. "What? Who are you?" my dad spat. "I'm your son Lucas, remember? Or did you forget me?" "When did you get back?" my mum asked firmly. "We saw you leave." Lucas didn't answer. "I made it very clear I didn't want the police involved." "We didn't," my mum lied. "And they just showed up to tell us that they found me?" Lucas laughed. "Who are you?" my dad asked firmly. "What happened to my son?" Lucas sighed, as if defeated. "I really hoped it wouldn't go like this. We had it all planned out. The body was meant to have been collected tonight. That's why I left it on the tree. I guess those fucking kids can be blamed for all this." "Well, what the fuck?" my dad screamed. Lucas continued. "We've been studying you all for a little while now. The plan was for me to live alongside you, grow with you, learn from you. But that really didn't work out." He laughed, as if he'd just been caught out in a prank. We sat speechless as Lucas continued. "You see, we took an interest in this town. It's small, quiet. If anything goes wrong, we can just make it all go away. Not like in cities. We watched Lucas from the woods. Sweet kid, always energetic, always left outside to play alone." "Fuck you!" my dad growled. "We lured him into the woods one day. He was a good climber. Then we took him in deeper. Then we took him up." "Up? What do you mean up?" my dad snapped, fists clenched. "To the ship. We took good care of him. In fact, I'm the perfect model of what he'd look like right now." My dad stood up and swung at Lucas, but Lucas grabbed his fist and threw him backwards, throwing him into the metal fireplace. "Dan!" my mum screamed. My dad sat up, blood dripping from a cut to his head. "We spent years creating the perfect clone. Such wasted efforts now, really." He laughed, looking at us. "I'm sure you heard me sneaking through the bathroom window Saturday night. Paper-thin walls, after all." My mouth fell open. "The banging. Why did you break in?" Lucas grinned. "I had to stash my bag. It's important to keep the subject on me for the first day so I can absorb their scent, a familiar smell to you. But I decided not to walk in the front door with it. I figured that might raise some suspicion, so I hid it behind the shower curtain." My mum cried. Please tell me this isn't real." Lucas shrugged. "So, you're an alien?" I stuttered. "You could say that," Lucas cackled. "There's a lot of different species of these aliens, as you call us. But my species isn't as advanced as others. The higher-ups don't care much for Earth, or this galaxy. But my species has always enjoyed Earth. Humans are fairly easy to duplicate, and they fight over such mundane issues. We set ourselves a little project to clone and live with you all. We planned to gain more information, then overrun. But that did not play out." "Get out!" my dad choked. "Leave my family alone and get out!" "I'll leave, but I'll have to take my sister." Lucas beamed at me. "What? She's not your sister. You're not going near my daughter." "Are you sure? Because I think you'll find she's of my species. You never wondered why she has red hair, while all of ours is dark?" My dad's mouth fell open, and my mum turned pale. This family wasn't our original plan. We took the baby of another couple, planned to duplicate it and put her back to grow and expand our knowledge of your kind from a very young age. But our duplication process takes time. Even though duplicating one of our own into something as young as a baby is fast, it still took a few weeks. By the time we got back, the couple had, shall we say, given up on themselves after their offspring was missing. He looked out the window to the garden. We'd put too much effort and resources into this. One of our own was in duplication and we couldn't waste it. So we switched with the family we'd already recently duplicated. It helped that both offspring looked similar. Blue eyes and no hair yet. With everything going on in your lives looking for your son in grief, I'm not surprised nobody noticed. Lucas stared at me intently. I took a long time coming back. It took longer than expected to perfectly duplicate myself into the host. By then you wouldn't be looking for a 9-year-old. So we waited, let the duplicate age into adulthood so I would have more freedom. We had preserved the memories of the offspring up until the age of duplication, so I had some basic knowledge of this family and this species' functions. But now that this has been discovered, and years of planning is wasted, I think it's best if myself and my sister leave Earth. You're more advanced than we'd first thought, and I'm kicking myself for being careless with the bag in the woods, but we can come back in some years after you've passed to try again. Now, sister, let's show them our true form. Lucas said some things which sounded similar to the hushed noises I heard from the living room that night, and I suddenly felt as if I had burning hot needles under my skin. I cried out in pain and fell to the floor, my parents screaming my name. The skin on my hands fell away to reveal long gray fingers. Blood poured from my body like a Hollywood horror movie. My brain throbbed as my skull began to change shape and my hair pushed out in clumps before everything went black. I choked on my hands and knees before forcing myself to look up. My parents stood at the other side of the room, staring at me with a look of sheer terror. Mum. Dad. I tried to speak, but it felt as if I no longer knew how to talk, and a crackly noise escaped my mouth instead. You see now, this is our true form. I turned to look at Lucas, who had also transformed. His skin was a greenish gray, his head was oval, and his eyes were a dark red color with no pupils. He was tall and slim, with long gray fingers and short, sharp claws at the end. His teeth were small, but razor sharp. To anyone else he would look humanoid and terrifying, but to me he looked familiar. Let's go now, sister. Lucas extended his long, slender arm towards me. But my parents, my friends, I stammered. I looked over to my parents. They were screaming and crying, huddled in the corner like horrified children. Get out! My mum howled. Fucking get out! I tried to speak, finding myself unable to cry in my new body. They won't understand you, Lucas told me. You don't have the vocal range to communicate with them outside of your duplicate. We will be collected out in the woods. Come along now. You aren't welcome here anymore. I took one last look at my parents, who had crumpled to the floor, sobbing, before taking Lucas's hand and leaving. I took a breath, knowing this would be my last time setting foot in the home I grew up in, with the parents who raised me, and everything that made me was about to be gone forever. And everything that was me was now soaked into the living room carpet. As the back door closed, my phone lit up from the puddle of blood, hair, and clothing on the living room floor. They found a skeleton? What the fuck? Then who the fuck's staying with you? Aaron messaged. Yeah, no, this is way too weird now. Yaz? Quinny replied. Yaz? Yaz, worried reply. Yaz, that's it, we're coming over. And that was Family is Forever by Tumbleweed Passes on Reddit r/NoSleep. I gotta be honest with you, when I first kind of read the title and kind of gave it a quick glance to kind of get an idea of whether I wanted to cover the story or not, I thought it would have been some kind of like really weird like thing. Maybe he was raised by a different family and turned kind of, completely crazy, cannibalistic or something like that. It gave me like Resident Evil 7 kind of vibes about like a horrific family situation. I wasn't expecting aliens. I gotta admit, that's incredibly refreshing. It's what a great little twist to it, and I really liked it. That was awesome. Honestly, what a great little read. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. We'll see if for whatever's next. Take care. If you see a floating body, run in the opposite direction or take shelter. What in the fuck? I ask myself as I scratch my head. Did I read this sign correctly? If you see a floating body... What do you mean floating? Floating like in space? What the... Run the opposite direction or take shelter. Why? I ask myself. The signs are everywhere. One sign on every tree. The signs are well made too, like metal road signs with printed digital texts. I'm starting to hyperventilate and get freaked out by these weird signs. It's 5 p.m., almost night, and I'm still lost. I was driving on a distant province to visit a long relative and got lost. I drove for 4 hours, away from civilization. I entered a couple of long dark tunnels. I took turns on roads with dense trees at the side, some concrete and some dirt road, only to realize that I've been reading my map wrong this whole time. I got lost and attempted to backtrack, only to stop at a weird part of the woods with a bunch of weird red metal signs with a weird white text. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. I attempted to calm myself as I look at the sign. The sky is turning blue and the night is coming, but it's been an hour of driving alongside trees since I last passed by a fellow car. I fear that I might have to spend the night driving the road at dense trees alone. Another weird note that I noticed is that the signs only exist on one side of the road. They weren't placed on any trees at the other side, only at this side. The trees plastered with signs continued up on a hill. My curious mind followed the hill. I climbed the peak whilst passing by multiple trees with the sign pinned on them. Now at the peak of the hill, my tense heart was calmed by a beautiful sight. It was a small town below, with a bunch of people beneath. The town seems to be lively and active, full of life and activities. People drinking on bars, children playing on a playground, and people chatting all over outside. The town may have been covered with trees and mountain, but nonetheless. It was somewhere to spend the night and ask for directions. Fucking finally, civilization! I yelled. My eyes followed the road that will lead me towards the town. It was only a few more minutes of drive. I just need to enter the green rock tunnel and I'll reach them soon. I got so lost that I didn't even notice that I went up a mountain, and now I'm overlooking a beautiful town from above. But what the heck are these signs? They're also everywhere around the town. A high-pitched tornado siren immediately whirs all over the town. Red lights suddenly covered the streets as the siren rumbled very loud. It made me duck and cover my ears. I looked down below and saw panicking. People that were drinking at the outside tables of a restaurant immediately ran inside. The children playing at the playground ran for the sewers, along with some adults, taking cover at the nearest possible area. I saw everybody make haste to take shelter, taking cover on houses that weren't theirs or places that they shouldn't be. What the fuck was that? Is there a tornado? The town emptied in streets in a mere minute. Items all over the ground, drinks and food being left at the table, windows and doors being closed, and curtains all shut. It was a horrifying sight to be viewed from above. The peace that I saw below were immediately turned in a desperate run for cover. I hugged a tree and ducked beneath it in fear of whatever it is they ran from. I scanned the area and saw no tornadoes, but instead I noticed something very weird. What the fuck was that? I saw a tree at the town. It was getting pulled off the concrete pavement, its roots coming along with it, getting pulled upwards towards the air. What in the... Then I saw bodies, at least tens of them. I saw people from different areas, some from the forest, some from the road, and some from the town. They emerged and became noticeable as they flowed upwards like a balloon, slowly ascending to the air. I saw some animals too, tens of them as well, floating upwards. It was a weird sight to see. Floating people, animals, and trees as if gravity stopped working for those beings. The sight immediately changed from weird to very violent all of a sudden. I noticed that the trunk and the branches of the trees are getting twisted and turned violently, as if some force is bending them, breaking them, and curving them as they levitate. The bodies of the animals and people then started twisting and bending violently in ways they shouldn't. Limbs being distorted, joints being twisted, waists being bent the wrong way backwards, and some heads being turned like a bottle cap. I hear them scream in pain and agony as their bones get contorted the wrong ways. The screams and cracking of bones goes along with the siren, making a choir of horrifying music. It was my cue to run. I ran down the hill towards my car. I panicked to get my keys and drove as fast as I could. I drove towards the town and made it to the Green Rock Tunnel. This tunnel leads straight to that town. I drove through the tunnel with my car, ignoring the speed limit. But when I'm midway on traversing the tunnel, a surge of strong wind, like an explosion. It killed the engine of my car and all the lights on the tunnel. My car came to a halt and suddenly went dark. The only light at the end of the tunnel is what I can see. I rolled up my windows and locked my doors, an attempt to shelter me from whatever is going on outside. It was quiet, still, and dark. The only thing I can hear is the violent beating of my heart and the siren still going on. What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? I tried breathing slowly, not just to calm my heart, but to attempt to conceal myself. Conceal? From what? I feel like I should do so, that I should breathe as little as possible. I don't know why, but my instinct tells me to. Rain. It started raining outside. I squinted my eyes at the end of the tunnel and saw the rain. It was red. The blue light at the end of the tunnel were showing me red droplets of rain, along with some splinter of wood showering the road at the other end. Chills ran down my spine, and my body felt extremely cold. Not because of the weird rain out of nowhere, but because of what I sensed. I sensed something behind the car, behind the tunnel. I stopped breathing in an attempt to conceal myself. I peeked at my side mirror to see what's behind the tunnel, to take a peek on what presence I felt. There I saw red eyes glowing from the distance. They were at the tunnel, and it's slowly approaching my direction. My blood ran cold with terror, and I covered my face with my hands. I didn't wish to see what was coming, and I'm too afraid to breathe. I wanted to hide. I sneaked some small inhale and exhale from here and there, but I tried breathing as little as possible. I was frozen in fear. The quiet was interrupted when all of a sudden my car immediately started again, and the engine growls loud. It made me scream and jump from my seat. I opened my eyes and looked around. I see the tunnel light back on again, my car also running again. I peeked at the mirrors and saw nothing. Is it over? I drove slowly until I reached the outside of the tunnel. The rain had stopped, but I saw that the road is wet. Wet with thick red blood and full of wooden splinters. I drove to the town and saw the people coming out of their covers. Children crying and people panicking. I drove slowly along the road until someone waved their hands in front of my car in an attempt to stop me. He screamed at me and said, Hey, you there at the car. Who the fuck are you? You weren't from here. Did you just drive by recently? He screamed. I stopped my car and talked from the car window. Yes, I came from the tunnel. What the fuck just happened? Where the fuck am I? Really? You just came by. Did you see it happen? He replied with panting voice. Yes, I saw whatever the fuck just happened. I also saw whatever the fuck those are in the tunnels, I replied. They're at the fucking tunnels? Sound the fucking alarm, everyone back at their houses. And that was If You See a Floating Body, Run in the Opposite Direction or Take Shelter by Javirdin024. So, as you can probably imagine, there's quite a level of rough translation, but, you know, that should be forgiven because the story, the concepts about this, they're really good, they're really fun. I think it's crazy because I still don't fully understand what's going on, but I think that's yet again one of those like awesome fear of the unknown kind of things where you get to kind of see and experience, you get to maybe have a level of comprehension, but you don't know fully what's going on. But I mean, it's terrifying, and the fact that, you know, they've clearly put up all these crazy signs, and you know, it's quite clear this has become a routine to them. You know, it's like horrifying. This has been happening long enough that I'm not going to say they're used to it, but they've had to at least deal with it. You know what I mean? And they don't know any other way to deal with it besides just, you know, doing the best to protect themselves. It's really good. I mean, the title alone brought me to it, and I'm so glad I got to read it for you guys. It's, oh man, really, really crazy story. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. My neighbor got a dog. I don't think it's actually a dog. My neighbor Jack adopted a border collie 2 weeks ago. At least, that's what I thought. Now I'm not so sure. I first saw Toto out on a walk. He was sniffing some of the flowers growing next to the sidewalk as Jack waited, scrolling through his cell phone. "Wow, you got a dog," I called out, waving. "I certainly did. His name's Toto. Border collie mix." Toto stopped sniffing the flowers and glanced up at me. I'd encountered many dogs on this street, and they ran the whole gaunt of dog greetings, from curious sniffs to protective growling to jumping up and licking my face. None of them just stared at me like Toto did. "Wow, he's beautiful, and so big for a collie mix." I began to crouch down. "Can I pet him?" "Oh, actually, he's a little shy," Jack said. "Having a little trouble adapting, you know? But I'm sure he'll warm up in a few days." He tugged gently on the leash. "Come on, Toto." I watched as they walked away from me. The next time I saw Toto, I was dropping something off for Jack. He'd lent me his drill for a home improvement project, and I'd never returned it. But when I rang the doorbell, I didn't hear the usual barking I did with other dog owners. Instead, just the pat, pat, pat of feet against wood. And then Toto's face was in the glass instead of the door, staring out at me. Not barking or growling or pawing at the door, just staring. Before I could think anything of it, Jack's footsteps sounded through the hall, and the door swung open. "Hey, Amir." "Just wanted to give you this back." "Oh, thanks. Hey, why don't you come in? I'm just about to pull some cookies out of the oven." Jack was an avid baker, and I couldn't say no to his cookies. I stepped inside and followed the warm cinnamon smell to the kitchen. Toto followed behind me. But I could tell something was off. I don't have a dog, but I have a lot of friends with dogs, and we can always tell the dog is coming our way when we hear that mistakable clicking sound of its nails against the floor. It was instinctual at this point. Hear that sound and scarf down the last bit of steak, or put the chocolate out of reach, or get ready to get licked on the face. This dog didn't make that sound. No clicking of nails against the wooden floor. Just sort of a dull thump, thump, thump with each step. I glanced back at Toto, and I realized his movements were a little odd too. His steps were a little jerky, a little stiff, a little clumsy for a dog of his build. He wasn't limping or anything, just overall the movements didn't look quite right. "Hope you like snickerdoodles," Jack said, pulling the tray out of the oven. "Wow, they look amazing." "My Nana's recipe," he said proudly. "Ate these every day after school. Fond memories." I picked up a cookie and took a bite. But I had an audience. Toto was staring at me. Well, that wasn't weird. Dogs love to stare at people food. I was just about to ask Jack if these cookies were safe for dogs, but his phone went off. "Oh, sorry man, gotta take this," he muttered as he disappeared down the hall and into the office. I sat down at the kitchen table. Toto didn't move, just stared at me from across the kitchen. Weirdly, he wasn't licking his lips or anything as he stared hungrily at the cookie in my hand. "You're a weird dog, but I like you," I said. The dog continued to stare. "I'm sorry, I can't give you any cookie. I don't know if they're safe." More staring. "You're gonna like it here. It's a good neighborhood." He canted his head. And as he did, I realized there was something off. Something about the way the light bounced off his fur. It was a little too shiny, a little too perfectly groomed for a rough and tumble collie dog. I squinted at him, studying him. And then I heard something. A quiet, rushing sound, like a whisper. And I guess I must have been imagining it, but it almost sounded like... God, it almost sounded like someone whispering. "Help me." I stared at the dog. "Sorry about that," Jack said, wandering back in. "I just had to take that. It was a new client, and we're trying to keep him. How do you like the cookies?" "They were amazing," I said, standing up. But I've gotta go. Mandy and the girls will be back from softball any time now, and I'm supposed to have dinner ready. Oh, dinner duty, huh? He motioned at the snickerdoodles. Take some back with you. Say you made 'em from scratch. Mandy knows I can't bake like that. But thanks. I stepped out the front door, waving back at Jack and Toto. Jack waved, grinning. The dog just stared at me as usual. But this time, his black, glassy eyes sent chills down my spine. I swear, there's something fucked up about that dog. The girls were asleep, and Mandy and I were enjoying some much-needed quality time. We sat on the couch with a bottle of wine, an episode of The Office in the background as we talked about our days. Mandy was surprisingly interested in the story. So, you've never heard him bark? No. And he walks weird and just stares at you? Yup. She shook her head, laughing. That does sound really weird. Even weirder than Aunt Polly's dog. Remember her? Is that the one that makes the weird screeching sound? Yeah. We laughed about it, hung out some more, and then eventually went to sleep. But even an hour after Mandy had fallen asleep, around midnight, I was lying wide awake, thinking about that fucking dog. And then I decided to do something really stupid. I probably never would have done it if I hadn't drunk 3 glasses of wine. But with liquid courage, I crept downstairs and slipped out of the house. The lights were still on in Jack's house. When I got there, I ducked behind his hydrangea and peered into the window. Golden light spilled into the living room from the kitchen. Jack was sitting on the couch, looking at his laptop. Toto was lying on the floor, his black eyes glittering in the low light. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to detect my presence at all. After several minutes, Jack shut the laptop and disappeared down the hallway. Toto watched him, but didn't follow. I was about to go back home, and then I saw it. Toto stood up, and then using the couch to balance himself, he stood up again. He was standing on 2 legs. I watched with wide eyes as he walked into the kitchen, stood in front of the refrigerator, and then a small opening appeared, smack dab in the middle of Toto's chest. A human hand came out. It grasped the refrigerator door, pulled it open, greedily grabbed some food off the shelf. Then the dog sat back down on the floor, cross-legged, and the hand, holding a leftover sandwich, disappeared into the hole. I stared through the window, my heart pounding in my chest. It's a costume. There's a person in there. I hightailed it out of there, wrapped myself in blankets, and lay next to my wife, wide awake, thoughts rolling through my head. I didn't expect to fall asleep, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, a loud noise woke me from a deep sleep. Knocking. Someone was knocking on my front door. Bleary-eyed, I hobbled down the stairs, I looked through the peephole, and saw Jack, standing on my front porch, looking incredibly angry. I don't know what he wants, but I think he knows that I know. That, for some reason, he's keeping what appears to be a full-grown man in his house, wearing a dog costume and pretending to be a dog. Because when I went over there that night, still tipsy from the wine, I totally forgot he has security cameras. Update. I decided to ignore Jack. Since I knew he was keeping a man in his house dressed as a dog, I figured that was my safest bet. Besides, it was almost 2 a.m. He'd just assume I was asleep, right? I know you're in there, Amir. Open up! He sounded angry. Really angry. I shrunk against the door, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. Amir! He knocked for a few more minutes, then finally I heard his footsteps retreat off the porch. I stood there for several more minutes, in case he came back. Then I checked all the locks and crept back upstairs. For the rest of the night, I tossed and turned, trying to figure out what to do. I should just call the police. But what if it's consensual? What if that man, for whatever reason, agreed to pretend to be Jack's dog? Does he self-identify as a dog? Is it a furry thing? But then I thought of how angry Jack sounded. And when dawn broke, I called the cops. They didn't believe me at first, but finally they agreed to go over to Jack's and check it out. I ran over to the living room window and parted the blinds, staring out across the street at Jack's house. By the time the police car pulled up, I could hear Mandy's steps above me, but I remained glued to the window, watching. 2 officers, a tall woman and a plump man, exited the vehicle and stepped up onto the porch. I saw the woman raise her fist and knock. I waited, holding my breath. But as the door cracked open, I heard it, clear as day. Barking. Jack began talking to the officers, his expression darkening, and then a blur of brown and white fur shot out. My jaw dropped as the dog leapt up into the officers. A pink tongue shot out and it began licking them, letting out happy yelps. No. It was a real dog. It had to be. It was considerably smaller than the 2 officers. No way an adult man could fit in there. And it was barking and licking and jumping around. The dog suit I'd seen yesterday hadn't even been able to open its mouth. What are you doing? I turned around to see Mandy there, staring at me. I sat down and explained everything to her that happened last night. But I could tell she didn't believe me. I couldn't really blame her. After all, she could see a very live, very real dog jumping around Jack and the police officers. So you're saying you think, in the middle of the night, he let the dog man go and adopted a real one? I know it sounds crazy, but it does sound crazy. And you shouldn't go calling the cops on our neighbors, unless something really bad is happening. If our house is on fire, or if someone breaks in, you think Jack is going to want to help us? But I saw it. It was a person, I swear. You were drunk. You probably just saw the dog jumping up while Jack was behind him or something, so it looked like a hand sticking out. Mandy, I swear. She shook her head and walked out of the room. Soon after, the officers came by and confirmed it. Jack was in possession of a large, very friendly, 100% real collie dog. That son of a bitch, I whispered, staring out the window as they pulled away. I knew the truth. Even if everyone else thought I was crazy, I know what I saw. That's why, later that night, when I saw Jack's car pull out, I snuck out of the house and crept into his backyard. Now that I remembered the security cameras, I was careful to forge a path that avoided them. But as soon as I stepped up onto the deck, the collie was scratching at the back door, barking at me. Shh. I tried the door. Locked, of course. Swearing, I made my way around to the side door. It was locked, too. I'll have to try tomorrow. Maybe I can come over for more cookies? I asked the police to keep my name out of the whole thing. Maybe he isn't certain it was me. I shook my head. Yeah, right. Of course he knows it was me. I started towards the front of the house. I turned around. A rattling, metallic sound. And then it was coming from the basement. I ran over to the Bilko doors. They were locked, but with a padlock. Thankfully, I had a pair of bolt cutters in my garage. I crept back home, grabbed the bolt cutters, and made my way back into the yard. With a swift downward motion, the door was unlocked. I lifted the door open. 2 black, glinting eyes stared back at me. It was him, the man in the dog suit, sitting in the center of the basement, a collar wrapped around his neck, the chain fastened to one of the support holes. I grabbed the bolt cutters and ran down the stairs. I'm gonna get you out of here, I whispered, rushing towards him. No reaction. He just stared at me, still as a statue, his plastic dog fur shining in the light from the one bare bulb on the ceiling. A chill crept over me. Why wasn't he reacting more? He didn't have to act like a dog anymore. Jack wasn't around. Why wasn't he calling for help? Or thanking me? Or something? Why was he just staring at me through the dog suit? I crouched on the cold cement floor, positioning the bolt cutters across the chain. I'm going to set you free. Hold still. A hand shot out of the dog's chest and grabbed me by the arm. Hey! But the hand only tightened around my bicep. I tried to tug free, but the nails dug into my skin. Let me go! I shouted, but the hand was pulling me in, towards the dog's lifeless, glassy eyes, the plastic nose, the painted mouth. And then I heard something. A whisper. Behind you. I whipped around and my blood ran cold. A silhouette sat perched above the basement's doors, peering down at us. Jack. I grabbed the bolt cutters and squeezed. The chain broke in two. The dogman leapt up and, with amazing speed for wearing a heavy costume, bounded up the stairs towards Jack. But Jack was too fast. Before he could slip past, he grabbed the dog by the arms and pushed him back down the stairs. He was still at the bottom. I grabbed the bolt cutters and ran up the steps. In one quick motion, I swung them at Jack. He ducked. You don't know what you're doing, Amir. You don't know the whole story. You're keeping a guy locked in your basement and forcing him to wear a dog costume? I raised the bolt cutters. Amir, just listen to me. He's not who you think he... The bolt cutters hit the side of his head. Not that hard. I wasn't swinging to kill, but Jack crumpled to the ground, clutching his head, groaning in pain. And in that moment, I bounded down the stairs and grabbed one of the dogman's paws. Here, come on, quick, I whispered, pulling at the fake paw. Slowly he rose. One human hand popped out of his chest. Then a second. I helped him undo the clasps on the belly and under the arms. Then the costume slowly crumpled away from him. Then I was staring at an adult man, taller than myself, wearing a border collie mask. But he didn't reach up to pop off the mask. No. He just stood there, absolutely still, staring down at me with those lifeless, glassy dog eyes, plastic brown fur shining in the light. Something about this felt wrong. I backed away, backed up the steps and out into the lawn. His eyes never left mine. He turned his head slowly to watch me go. And then, when I'd gotten about 10 feet from the basement door, he bolted up the steps and ran across the lawn for the woods. But when he got to the tree line, he stopped. He turned around, slowly pulled off the mask, and then he was staring at me, grinning with a smile of yellowed, rotten teeth. Thank you, he whispered, and then he disappeared into the darkness. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because I recognized that face. I'd seen it on the news, a man who'd been convicted of stalking and murdering 3 women, who then escaped from prison earlier this year. And then the pieces clicked into place. His name, if I remembered correctly, it was Sam Baker. And Jack? He was Jack Baker. Jack slowly pulled himself up, groaning in pain. Amir, he said, staring into my eyes. Did you just set my brother free? And that was My Neighbor Got a Dog. I Don't Think It's Actually a Dog, by Blair Daniels. You can find the story on her own subreddit, r/Blair Daniels, but I originally found it on r/NoSleep. Now, what I really like about this story is it's yet another creepy concept that you don't see an awful lot, which is really good and really refreshing. The idea is really bizarre because then it really makes you break down. Is this obviously some kind of an arrangement they have? It must be because, the guy in the dog costume isn't really freaking out or trying to get help or anything. He just seems to be weird, right? There's clearly an arrangement, right? That's what I understand from it. It's still weird though. It's still really weird. Is it like a kink thing? Is it like I don't know. It's just creepy, which is awesome. Awesome for a little story like this. Really, really enjoyed it. It also made me think of 2 things. Number one was the film Tusk, which, thankfully it's not as horrific as that, because that went all kinds of off the rails with how insane turning a person into a thing is. It's, God, the horror behind that film is crazy. If you haven't seen it, but you're squeamish, don't watch it. It's dark, it's heavy, it's a lot. It's a fucked up film. The second thing it made me think of is this, it's a Japanese guy. Hang on. My Secret Life as a Collie. Japanese man who transforms into a dog in $15,000 costume reveals he only does so for special occasions, and none of his friends know about his canine alter ego. But, just look at some of these pictures. This is him in that insane $15,000 costume and stuff, and he does it every once in a while. It's so interesting. There's even like a little video and stuff. It's just crazy, And his name's Toko when he's the dog. So for all I know, there could have been a lot of inspiration for the story from this. Maybe, maybe not. It could just be a crazy coincidence. Either way, still pretty weird and pretty creepy. But that's just my 2 cents. Well, I've really enjoyed the story. I hope you did too. We'll see if God, tongue-tied. We'll see for whatever's next. Take care. My son has been acting weirdly, and I think my wife knows. I first saw the chimpanzee when I came back after chopping our Sunday firewood. I'm retired, and my wife no longer works either. We live in a house by the woods, alone in Northern California, and it snows around this time of year. I've rarely left the state, and never traveled outside the US, but I'd seen photos of chimps before, and how one could have gotten into our area, let alone our house, was beyond me. My wife and I have both had quite a few jobs over the past few years, many paying very well, and my wife and I both share a tendency not to spend any more than we absolutely have to, or close enough. That, along with her father's very rich inheritance, helped us from early on get the things we needed and get enough money to raise a family in retirement early. Not a realistic goal for most, especially in California, but we made do. And here we are. Neither of us want to be rich, and we prefer the woods and the mountains up here to be more expensive city houses. Plus, property tax here is too much for anything big. Our home is a few miles from the nearest town and gas station, and we aren't close to any relatives. We grew up in Sacramento, but neither of us liked the heat, so I eventually got a home built up north and we finally moved in after retirement a year ago. This is where we plan to have our 2 kids, and while it might not have seemed possible to reach this point, my wife has been more financially successful than me, and somehow made this lover's dream a reality. Now we spend the weekdays raising our first child, my wife has started writing books, and I've taken up shooting. I'd finished chopping the wood, and I made sure to set it in a neat pile, because I always like to be tidy around the barn. On Sundays I try to rest, so I went back to the house to spend the evening with my wife. I rarely went into town anyway, and I much prefer her company to a bar. It was sitting in the cradle in our room when I opened the door. Small-sized, clearly an infant. I'm slightly ashamed to say it, but I was scared for a moment. It was sitting in the middle of the cradle, face thrust out toward me, eagerly awaiting attention. It didn't move much, but it was breathing and had one hand wrapped around the bars, as if it was ready to climb out. The way it looked at me and smiled with its large eyes is not something I was prepared for. I didn't scream, I didn't move. I didn't want to take my eyes off the thing. A shot of terror coursed through my blood, primal and cold. I turned, carefully watching the baby chimp, and yelled for my wife. There wasn't any response, but I waited and kept calling out. After a moment, I heard footsteps coming my way. I was relieved, but still scared and no small bit confused as to why a chimpanzee was in my son's crib. My wife walked up behind me and asked what was the matter. I moved aside and showed her what was in our room. A shocking mix of emotions flowed across her face. My wife is usually good at hiding what she feels when she wants to, but of course this caught her off guard. I caught surprise and concern, what I deemed to be rational emotions, but I almost doubted seeing a flash of guilt in there. Almost. She rushed to the side of the cradle before I could stop her, and by the time I reached her, she had picked up the thing. I froze as I reached out and saw what she was holding. In my wife's arms was our son, not looking upset in any way. She started cooing to him and bouncing him up and down, and all the while occasionally glaring at me between making faces at the baby. She usually acts like this when I have neglected some tiny detail about caring for the baby, but doesn't mean any harm by it. I knew that in a moment she would reprimand me for making some small mistake or not noticing something, but I couldn't get over what I'd seen. After bouncing the baby a few more times, she paused. Is something wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I stared at her, then shook my head, and told her it was nothing. I was sure I saw an animal and not our son in that bed. But there he was, and no chimpanzee in sight. I checked around the room and looked at the crib a bit later, but nothing was out of the norm. The next incident was at church the week after. My wife and I aren't by any means devout Christians, and we don't always commit to attending any one chapel. But we try to make a visit together to some church or other every few Sundays, and occasionally meet some new people. I had thought quite a bit about what I'd seen the week before, and I hadn't told my wife about it, but I wanted to consult with a priest or other religious authority about what I'd seen. I didn't want to go to a doctor due to traveling time, so to find help was my solution. It was as we were about to enter the chapel, and my wife suddenly turned around and started to comfort the baby. She always likes to hold him instead of using a sling at church, and plays with him enough that this was normal. But as she hid the baby from my sight, I saw a flash of something. Black hair. My kid has short blonde hair right now, but it will eventually fade to dark brown like his parents. What I saw as she turned was long, straight black hair, being flung about by the quick movement. It was the baby's hair. I didn't react as fast as I would have liked to, but by the time I got around to looking at the child in my wife's arms, it was my son. He was as adorable as always, and he gave me the sweetest look. And there was no black hair. Nothing was wrong, and my wife didn't seem disturbed in the slightest. I thought it must have been my imagination, but I was still determined to talk to a priest after the meeting. I never got to. My wife made sure we rushed back home as soon as possible, making some excuse and giving me a look that said, "Don't you try to say it's not a good reason." I sucked it up, but didn't suspect that my wife was trying to interfere with my plans. Maybe it was my imagination. After all, she hadn't picked anything up. The fawn was what stopped me doubting it was just me. Another 2 weeks had gone by, and my baby had started crawling. My wife was super excited about this and regularly encourages him to chase her through the house or takes him out with her to get the feel of nature. I was inside reading what my wife had added to her latest work-in-progress novel, and she came and asked me to take my turn with the baby while she finished the piece. It was fairly good already, but I agreed and went outside. It had snowed earlier, but only enough to cover the ground in a thin sheet of white, and the air was pleasantly cold. The only problem was that I couldn't find the baby. I don't know what my wife had been thinking in not handing him off to me and leaving him outside, but my wife loses control of her ADHD sometimes and often leaves things she was holding in random places. I concluded she must have left the baby in her haste to put her train of thought down on paper. It wasn't an excuse, and I resolved I would have words with her when I found the baby and got back inside. But I had to find the baby first, and he couldn't have crawled far, nor would he have wanted to in the cold snow, thin as it was. Thing is, there were no marks in that snow at first glance. Nothing to indicate where the baby had gone, and I assumed she'd set the baby down near the door. On second glance, there were marks. It was abundantly clear that she had set him down a few feet away from the door, and that he had crawled a bit. What wasn't clear was why there were deer tracks leading away from the spot. Small deer tracks. I hurried to where the deer tracks led, behind the barn. I took a turn and found the woodpile, with the tracks leading around it. I leaned around, hoping to find an ordinary fawn, dreading something worse. It was something worse. Lying in the snow where the deer tracks led was my son, shocked into silence by the cold. The prince led up to him, after they seemed to have paced a bit. He was sitting where the tracks ended. I immediately picked him up and hurried him inside. My wife looked up from her writing and instantly saw something was wrong. Her first instinct was to make sure the baby was okay, and after getting him warm and tucked away, turned on me, ready to whip out a lecture on fatherly behavior. I walked out the door, knowing she would follow. Angrily, she stuck her head out, and she was halfway through saying my full name in the most intimidating way possible when she saw the tracks. I explained what I'd seen to her, not sure what to expect. I didn't expect her to laugh. She thought it was incredible that I managed to let a deer pick up our son and move him without noticing or seeing the deer, and wouldn't budge on any attempt on my part to make her see that that was nothing like what actually happened. I was left disturbed, and for the first time in our relationship, I became suspicious my wife was hiding something from me. I've always trusted my wife. We've been honest and straightforward since we got together, and I've never had reason to suspect anything was going on that I couldn't see. Problems didn't always work themselves out, but we had faced them together through our marriage, and nothing had come this close to breaching our trust of each other. And that made the situation even more concerning. I had no small amount of spare time on my hands, and I was determined to get to the bottom of the issue. Over the next few months, there was an occasional hint of something strange. Cat hair on our bed, rabbit pellets on the bathroom floor, things I could notice but never explain. I cleaned these up before my wife could ever see them. Hiding things from my wife didn't sit well with me, but I had to make sure. I frequently checked on the baby, but never saw anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, our baby began to say words. There hadn't been an incident in a while, and checking for one was a background habit at this point. I was letting my guard down, and again I started to doubt whether anything was amiss. That's when I heard it. My wife was with the baby, in her writing office. I was getting the dishes done after we had dinner, and I heard a roar from the other room. It sounded like some high-pitched beast roaring, but I honestly had no clue what animal it could have come from. I'd heard grizzlies and mountain lions roar, but this was nothing like either of them. There was no sound I could hear from my wife. I hurried to the room, but made sure to be as quiet as possible. I opened the door to see my wife leaning over behind the desk, fussing over something I couldn't see. I could see the elephant's trunk flopping around the top of the desk, looking for something to grab onto. The desk is quite tall, so I couldn't see anything going on behind it, but it was clear there was a large animal there, and I could see my wife was tending to it. She quietly gasped at my entering while standing up and turning to face me. She wasn't holding the baby. "You know I don't like you pulling surprises on me when I'm writing." She cut off as I raced to the desk and looked over. On the floor was our son, diapers open and very messy. "Writing?" I asked, looking at her questioningly. "That, and something else you never seemed brave enough to manage," she teased as she knelt and continued to change the diapers. I felt a bit stupid, staring over the desk, but I was done with us both pretending nothing was happening. "What was that sound I heard?" She didn't look up. "Must have been the pipes. Have you checked to see if something is wrong?" Being involved with the designing of the house, I knew for a fact that there was nothing in the office area that would produce anything close to that sound, and I knew for a fact that my wife was lying to me. I left it for the day. I couldn't handle the fact that my wife was clearly hiding things from me, and the fact that there was a baby elephant in the house just moments earlier. I couldn't process it, but I still pushed away doubts and the thought that it was all in my head. I wouldn't accept that I was going insane. This was real, but I couldn't believe what was going on. Taking a step back, the possibilities were absurd. Animals from other continents suddenly appearing in my house? My infant son turning into these animals? None of these were anything I could tell anyone without seeming absolutely insane. Even priests seemed out of the question. For a while, I pretended not to notice the changes. I saw the claw marks begin to appear on the bars of the crib, the occasional feather of fur shed on the sheets. I pretended not to notice, and my wife made sure to clean it up. She knew as well. But I still had the feeling she knew a little more than me, and I had lost enough trust that I didn't want to bring it up. Besides, it wasn't a huge block in our day-to-day life, and rarely did the occurrences happen. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Whenever I heard noises from another room, I felt afraid for my son, because there was something wrong, and I had no idea what it was or how to prove it. Every time I saw one of the hints before they vanished, a deep terror filled me, my imagination creating all sorts of horrible scenes in which I saw these clues being left just before my wife hid them from me. The last straw was when the bear shredded our kitchen. Grizzlies are pretty common where we live, but I hadn't seen one come close to our house, let alone inside it. The door was hanging ajar, basically splinters, along with all the cupboards containing food in our kitchen. There was a possibility it was just a normal bear, unlike the rest of the time. I wasn't sure how to act, but just for safety I grabbed my Remington 870, ignoring how badly my hands were shaking. Going outside I could see clear bear tracks to the barn. A small bear. I didn't know what to do, but taking a few steps I could see the door was open. Carefully I moved around, keeping my distance from the door that was ominously cracked open, barely letting light into the dark interior. For a moment, I hesitated, afraid of what I would see inside. Fearfully, I kicked the door open the rest of the way, then scrambled to the light switch. The lights flickered on, showing the room well and revealing nothing. I ended up going in slowly, shotgun up. My body was trembling more than ever. After a moment of tense searching, I found a bear cub, huddled at the back. It looked frightened, but my first thought of caution was that I didn't know where the mother bear was. My second thought was that this bear might be my son. My third thought was interrupted by the mother bear slamming into me. My gun was thrown out of my hands and slid across the floor out of reach. I scrambled toward it, but was pinned down in an instant. I tried to turn to throw the bear off of me, giving a cry of exertion and horror that I knew would be my last. My efforts were futile, and I ended up doing nothing. So did the bear. A grizzly would have killed me in an instant if it saw its cub being threatened. I should have been mauled instead of pinned, but the bear simply moved past me and laid down right on top of the gun. I played dead, trying to hold still despite the dread within me. There was nothing else to do. I simply waited. I didn't calm down, but I forced myself not to move. Eventually, the bear moved back to the corner with its cub. But there was no cub. Instead, my son sat in the corner where the small bear had been. He started wailing as the bear picked him up with his clothes in its teeth, beginning to carry him outside. I couldn't take it. The sound of my son's crying hit something in me. I didn't think about dying. I rushed for the gun and raised it to the bear. It was only my conspiracy over the past few months that made me hesitate, and it was only my hesitation that saved me from shooting my own wife. There she stood, holding my son in her teeth, standing in the corner of the barn. My own wife. And my son. I couldn't process what was happening. I didn't even hear the gun hit the floor when I dropped it. There was nothing to say. We walked out together, went back into our living room, sat on the couch in front of the TV, and put the baby between us. She tried to hold my hand several times, but I wasn't having that. Her touch felt slimy to me, filthy. Well, not literally, but I just couldn't touch this thing that I thought was my wife. The baby changed, and I wasn't expecting it. Not a baby, but some pale, bone-thin infant with long, greasy black hair and oily skin, along with a hairless tail. It stared at me with its maw of a mouth hanging open, its black eyes seeming to pierce my soul. I looked away, back to my wife. After staring at one another in silence for a while, I said it. "Where is she?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I am your wife, silly." I stared at her blankly, asking the question again. She just shook her head and kept on reassuring me that she was my wife. I repeated the question, with a slight revision. "Where is my son?" Again, she just told me that the boy sitting between us was our son. I didn't believe it, and from the look on her face, I could tell she knew. There was pain there, pain and regret. The one thing I didn't expect to see was relief. What's going on?" I barely was able to get the words out. My wife gave me a sympathetic look, once more trying unsuccessfully to hold my hand. "How long?" She took a deep breath. "Second grade." I stared at her. That was the first time we had met. Clearly, she could see that I wasn't going to say anything. So she continued. She'd been a skinwalker her whole life. There wasn't much detail into her infancy, but she said that once she learned English, she joined school under the identity of a dead child she found in the woods. She never was bothered by the cold snows, but she soon found her place in her new family and only took off her skin when it got too uncomfortable after a few weeks. She always liked the woods because she could roam free with her skin off, rather than the reasons she'd always told me. When we met in college, she'd really fallen in love with me. Sometimes she forgot she was a skinwalker. She could almost pretend that she was human, until the itching began and she had to stop wearing the skin. Her emotions were just the same, and she had fulfilled her job successfully thanks to altering her form sometimes to get what we needed to live in our dream home. Some of it was unlawful, but thanks to changing skins, she wasn't suspected in the slightest. She hadn't known our kids would be skinwalkers too, but once he was born, she had to give him the skin of a relative. There was no elaboration, but somehow I knew that the other child had been killed. She still shared our dream of living up here with our kids, but eventually I stopped listening. I knew she loved me, but this was betrayal. She'd done everything to achieve our dream, and never stopped loving me, and I hadn't stopped loving her. I didn't know what to think about the crime, but the fact that my wife was a shapeshifter never seemed to fit into my head. Eventually, she trailed off. I realized she was crying when she told me she loved me and loved our child, and I could tell she was being honest when she said she still wanted to share our dream. If I was a good man, I would have let her stay, I loved this woman. I married her for love. I lived and retired with her, and she was still the woman I loved. But she wasn't. It broke my heart. I barely remember kicking her out of the house. The door still splintered and hanging, the kitchen still a wreck. She cried as she led our child away. I probably cried as well. It broke my heart again when she took off her skin, changing into a mirror image of what my son now looked like, only 8 feet tall and still bone thin. She looked back at me, and I wished I could see some emotion in that horrifying face that stared at me, branding a scar into my mind as she walked away into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. The blinds weren't closed, and the lights were still on in our room. I saw her stoop down and peek through the window, her demon's face smiling at me beneath those dead eyes knocking on the glass. I didn't move, but there must have been something in my face because she stumbled back and loped away while I stared at her back. I still lie awake some nights. Sometimes I get letters about how our son is doing in school, or cookies baked with a short and sweet note on my doorstep. Sometimes when I'm out chopping my Sunday firewood, I see a tall, thin figure in the woods. Sometimes I think it's not my imagination. Sometimes I feel lonely in bed at night. Sometimes, late at night, I'm not alone in bed. Sometimes, I don't mind. And that was My Son Has Been Acting Weirdly, and I Think My Wife Knows, by Stinky Bongo Zero. This story was so fun. It was so cool. It was so interesting. I kind of had a feeling there might have been a bit of a shapeshifter element to it, or maybe like the son was replaced by something. That was interesting. That was so interesting. The fact that, it's the wife as well. I mean, I guess it kind of plays into it. It was kind of to be expected, but the story was just great. It was just really fun. It's I personally love the idea of skinwalkers anyway. I don't think skinwalkers look exactly like that. That might be a little bit more like a rake / Slender Man kind of thing when it comes to their weird, thin, tall, skinny body things. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I obviously don't know the full lore and everything behind skinwalkers. That could be what they kind of look like. But I know they can look like people, and they kind of shapeshift and stuff. That's kind of like a whole thing. But they're typically more in the I think it's Utah. Is it the Uinta Basin region? That's the whole thing. Whether it was Skinwalker, like Skinwalker Ranch, probably one of the most famous things about Skinwalkers. Super awesome. Really enjoy that. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm so sorry. This story was great. I super enjoyed it, and I really hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. I bought an old cabin that was now mine. After I bought it, I regret buying it. Part 1 and 2. So basically, I bought a cabin in the woods. It was oddly cheap, around, let's say, $500. I bought it so I can have somewhere to relax in the winter. I moved into it in the winter season, away from the busy city of Chicago. The cabin in the woods was deep in the forest. It was a bit eerie, but I didn't care, as this was a nice day. 2023, December 31st, 10 p.m. So basically, I've been seeing these deer-like humanoids dart around the woods. I thought it was some drunk people, as in a few hours it was New Year's Eve. I sat down and I thought nothing much of it, drank some hot cocoa, and celebrated by popping some wine. This sounded lonely, but I didn't care. I'm not that social, and my family is kinda annoying, so being alone was better this New Year's. 2024, January 12th, 4 a.m. I woke up hearing some loud banging on my window downstairs. I thought it was just my mind, or the rain. I checked down and... What the fuck? I swear to God I saw a fucking deer's skull peeking through my window for a split second. I thought about calling 911, but I wasn't thinking they'd believe a man seeing a Wendigo-looking humanoid at 4 a.m. So I tried to find a logical explanation to calm myself down. And I just thought it was the wine that made me see the weird shit, as I was still drunk because I celebrated New Year's Eve to 3 a.m. Then I saw it. Cracks on my window. Holy shit. I just hope it's just a drunk guy. 2024, January 17th, 9 a.m. Woke up, drank some coffee, and took a walk outside. I was tired at first, but I saw hoof tracks and a dead deer. It looked like it was ripped in half. It was covered by the snow a bit. I almost puked, but ignored it, as it was probably a bear. I also saw some antlers. I went inside and cooked some eggs, and watched TV to take my mind off of what I fucking saw. I was enjoying my time, then 12 hours later I was reading a book, then I heard a super loud shriek. Then a crash. I was scared shitless. So I just started to my bed and tried to sleep. Part 2. I woke up to screaming and a window crash. I had cams in this house and checked the kitchen. There was a fucking Wendigo. A Wendigo! It was carrying the head of a rabbit. What the fuck? I hid in my closet, then I saw the Wendigo go upstairs in my room. It was sniffing me out. I fucking thought I was gonna die. Then it went away. I checked my cams and it was gone. So I went back to my bed, but before that I'm boarding up my windows and doors and kept a crowbar close to me, just in case. If I needed to escape, I thought about leaving the cabin and selling it. But I felt bad about a person or family buying this shit show of a cabin. 2024, January 21st. Not sure of the time, AM. I had a dream of an old lady with her bottom half ripped off. She told me, "Young man, please leave this awful cabin, it's not worth living." I asked, "How did you die?" She said, "Just go, go!" Then I saw those Wendigo things tear her apart, and I jolted awake. I realized I pissed myself, and had goosebumps on my body. I decided to move away, but when I was driving home, the road was strangely blocked, so I had to stay for a while. I cussed, "Fuck!" because I wanted to leave so fucking bad. I called the person who sold me the cabin, and I told him, "Who previously lived here?" He said, "An old lady. She went missing 5 years ago." I fucking pissed myself in fear and hanged up on my phone. I didn't care anymore. I decided to walk to the nearest town and then call a tow truck. I found a cheap motel and stayed there for a week, and my car came back after the tow truck towed it to the motel. 2024, February 17th, 1 p.m. I mostly forgot about it. I just thought it was me going mad, but then I heard the news that a family of 4 went missing in a cabin in the woods. What the fuck? This story was made by me. It is fake, so don't worry about me. LOL. And that was, I bought an old cabin that was now mine. After I bought it, I regret buying it. So on YouTube, this is Neopty. In our Discord server, this is Lemur. And so he's created this story in the Discord server. He's given me permission to read it. And I thought it was a cute little story. Honestly, I mean, the fact that the communities even wanted to like share things that they'd like me to read, I think that's just a beautiful thing. So first of all, Lemur, Neopty, I'm very proud of you. It's a good little story, man. If you want some constructive criticism, I'm gonna be gentle. Don't worry. So although it's short, which short isn't a bad thing, I think short stories are totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What I might do in the future, if there's gonna be quite a few short stories, I'm probably gonna maybe put multiple in a video just to kind of bulk it out for you guys. I think that'd just be better compared to having like little 5-minute videos. But basically, maybe less swearing doesn't hurt. Less swearing. Yeah. I mean, I understand, obviously people have reactions to horrifying situations. I totally get that. But yeah, that's pretty much the only thing, really. It's just kind of that, Otherwise, I like the fact that it, haunted by some kind of a Wendigo creature. And then, you also find out that a little bit in the future, when they've left, it turns out, a family was murdered in this place and stuff as well. After, and you're like, okay, so the events continue on as well. Really cool. Really nice job, man. Really proud of you. If anybody else wants to maybe join our Discord, I'll pop a link down below where you can also share stories with me in case you'd like me to read them as well. It's a nice little time. It's a nice little community. We're going to keep it going. All about that positivity. Well, thank you so much for your time. We will see you for whatever's next. Take care, guys. I always wondered why my godfather lived in the sticks and always carried a gun. Now I know why. My godfather Steve is a weird guy. He's a gun nut who lives in the sticks and eats roadkill. Dad says that Steve saved his life in Afghanistan and he's never trusted anyone more. He says there's more honesty in that hillbilly's bones than a legion of college-educated city slickers. He says I've become soft and judgmental. That I should take a leaf out of my godfather Steve's book because this man is the salt of the earth. We visit him every year around this time. It's cold in the mountains, so come evening time when we sit out drinking beers around the fire while they recount their war stories. There is only one rule when we visit Steve. No phones. He's completely off-grid. Once the beer starts flowing, they get pretty rowdy. When I turned 15, they decided I was old enough to drink. Damn, I started at 12, said Steve. He always carries his gun. I don't always feel super safe around it, especially when everyone starts drinking. After that night, however, I changed my mind. Now I won't take a leak without bringing a gun. We came up to the mountains a few days ago. It was great. We did some trout fishing, a little ping pong. One night we ran out of beer and Dad said he was sober enough to drive into town and restock. I volunteered to come, but he said no. I should stay and talk to my Godfather. Talk about things you're too embarrassed to talk to me about. I trust my dad. If he thinks I can learn a lot from this man, then he must be right. Before he left my Godfather, Steve suggested Dad take a shotgun with him in the footwell, just in case. This seemed pretty absurd to me. I couldn't think how to get the conversation started, and I regret what came out my mouth. So, my dad said you saved his life. How many Mujahideen were there? Mujahideen. Where do you get these ideas, boy? It wasn't no Mujahideen we had to worry about. They stayed the hell away from our valley. Your pa found himself on the wrong side of a div. If we had listened to the Mujahideen, I would still be living in Chicago. What's a div? Oh, nothing, boy. Forget I said anything. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes. I twiddled my thumbs. Had I heard him right? A div. I asked my second stupid question of the night. So, why do you live all the way out here in the sticks? It's an awful long way from civilization. What if you need something? Nature's bountiful out here. There's a liquor store in town. I stock up when I need to. I've gotten real good at ping pong, and no one or no thing I don't want to find me can find me here. He was right about that. There was no chance you could find this place if you didn't know exactly what you were looking for. My Godfather reached into the breast pocket of his military jacket and took out a hip flask with something engraved on it that looked Arabic. Before you ask, it's Farsi. It has the same script as Arabic, you ignorant fool. This here is a spell to keep the div away. That's why I keep it in my breast pocket close to my heart. You want some? What is it? What do you think, boy? It's hard liquor. It's about 50% pure ethanol. Might be whiskey, it might be vodka. We're not doing a wine tasting here, we're trying to get drunk. My Godfather is a rough guy, but when he talks like that, it's done with affection. This stuff really was moonshine, though. I got drunk just smelling it. We talked for a while about things like girls and work, and it was nice. I felt bad for thinking Steve was a bit weird. He was an okay guy. He spent most of his time out here philosophizing about the world and getting in touch with nature. He enjoyed being alone, but he loved our company too. Suddenly, we heard my dad's pickup truck screaming down the lane to the house. We heard a crash followed by 2 shots. We ran around the side of the house just in time to see my dad limping up the driveway. It's found us! It's here! Get inside! My Godfather grabbed me with one hand and pulled out his revolver with the other. He chucked me inside and held the front door open for my dad. He emptied his revolver into the night with 6 shots, then shut the door and turned the lock. Did you get the beer? What? Yes, I got the beer. It's in the truck. It's a damn shame because I could really do with a beer right now. My dad and Godfather started laughing. Batten down the hatches, shouted my Godfather. We ran around the house closing windows and locking doors. We were too full of adrenaline to be scared yet, but that would come soon enough. Both these men, my Godfather Steve and my dad, they knew the nature of what stalked us, and they had been preparing for this day for a while now. I was about to find out just how my dad's life had been saved, and exactly why my Godfather lived in the middle of nowhere. How do you think it found us? I don't know, goddammit. Boy, did you bring your phone? I reached into my pocket for my phone. I know I'd broken the rules by bringing it, but thank God I did, because now we could call someone for help. But Steve looked at me in disbelief. It's okay, boy. You weren't to know. God damn it, couldn't you have one weekend off the TikTok? My dad tried to explain. 21st century warfare breeds 21st century demons, son. It first showed up on our radio, then at the door. Because it took the form of people in our unit, it was able to move among us, picking us off one by one. Once that thing locks onto you, it won't stop until it finds you and kills you. It locked onto me that night in the valley. Moments before it could kill me, Steve played a ruse and lured it away. It's been chasing him ever since. But why is it here? You can run from your demons for only so long. It moves through the communication systems and finds a way. Can we defeat it? Not really. A bullet will slow it down and sap a bit of energy, but it'll be back. It's out there right now licking its wounds. But you can bet in 10 minutes' time, there'll be a knocking at the door. Steve came out of the basement. He was armed to the teeth. The plan was to empty as much ammo into its physical form as possible. Then my dad would lure it away. It was his turn to be on the run for a while. I wasn't happy with this plan at all. But then I saw something that made my heart leap with joy. My mom was walking up the driveway. She must have known something was up somehow. She could drive us home. Dad, Mom's out there. No, she's not, son. Son, stop! But it was too late. I'd opened the door. My mother grabbed me, then stuck out her tongue, but it was over a foot long. Her eyes became wide and dark, and she whispered something in a language I couldn't understand. My dad ran and cupped my ears while Steve took a big swig from his hip flask. He spat the booze in a long plume and managed to light it as the last of it left his mouth. The div was engulfed in flame and ran screaming into the woods. I now knew why the alcohol was 50% proof. The scream was blood-curdling. We slammed the doors shut. My dad was beside himself. He was crying with his head in his hands. Did you hear what it said? Did you hear all of it? Yes, why? It's imprinted on you now. The plan is void. It won't stop until it finds you. Son, I'm sorry to say, you're looking at a life on the run. But I didn't even understand what she said. It's not a she, son. It could take on any form. I just looked at the side window and saw my brother. Steve piped up and asked how badly damaged the truck was. My dad said, "Are you kidding? It's a Toyota pickup. You could drive through a volcano with that thing. It's just a little dented." Steve hashed out a plan. It involved creating a diversion while I made it to the pickup. The div wasn't fast, but it was relentless. If it knew where you were, it would get you. Even at 4 miles per hour, it could go almost 100 miles a day, or 3,000 miles a month. The choice is to either keep moving or go completely off-grid and hope it never catches up to you. And we know how well that worked. I'm ashamed to say, but because I had my phone with me, I took a couple of pictures. We also got the div on the Ring doorbell begging to come in. Each time shape-shifting to a different person we knew. Please only click on the links if you're fully mentally prepared. As far as I know, the image of it is a weak facsimile and can't do any damage, but we know that this thing is constantly evolving. The lights started to flicker. The whole house shook. We could hear panes of glass smashing upstairs. The room went cold and fell silent. It was as if all the joy had been sucked from the world. "I don't like this," said my dad. "It smells just like the cold mountain air of Afghanistan." We stood back to back in the living room with our eyes trained on the stairs, doors, and windows. We heard something fall over. Something else, a little closer now. The damn thing must have been on top of us. I looked up and saw its black, godless eye staring back at me. "It's above us!" Everyone shot at the ceiling. The lights were hitting the process, plunging us into darkness. Bits of plasterboard filled the room with dust and debris. I searched for my dad and called his name. He called back and I got out the torch on my phone to see him. He grabbed my shoulders and we locked eyes. Just as his pupils started to dilate until the whole eye was black, I realized it was the div. Its head exploded from the left. Steve, who had become stuck under the rubble, had let rip a shotgun cartridge. "Take that, you shape-shifted shit," he said. My dad, my real dad, dragged me out the front door. He pushed the keys to the pickup into my hands and simply said, "Godspeed, son." I ran to the truck, started the engine, and reversed around the corner. In this moment, the headlights caught my dad's silhouette on the porch, just as two gangly arms wrapped themselves around his chest and pulled him back inside. I sped off down the lane. About 5 minutes passed when I reached a fork in the road. I wasn't sure which way to take, though it didn't really matter where I was going, just as long as it was away from that thing. At the moment, I heard an explosion and saw a fireball in the distance rise up into the night sky. No doubt Steve had rigged the place up. I don't know if they made it out alive. I've been driving for a while now. The sun has come up, but I'm still in the middle of nowhere, and the radiator on the pickup is busted. I calculate that the div could be here by noon, but I'll start walking now. I wanted to post this story before I check my phone into the ravine. I'm going off-grid for a while. If someone claiming to be your mom or your dad or your brother or your best friend calls at the door, you better be sure it's them before you let them in. And that was I Always Wondered Why My Godfather Lived in the Sticks and Always Carried a Gun. Now I Know Why. By Optimal Credit, 1945. What I liked about this story is the fact that it kind of justifies why somebody would live off grid and maybe be like a little hardcore. It's a very interesting thing how it's steeped in like a bizarre entity kind of thing that kind of shape shifts, but is like just incredibly deadly. It also reminds me of the film It Follows in that kind of sense, how there's like always this one thing, but at least in It Follows, only the person who was being followed could see it, but it would always take form of a different shape, and it was always just following them, and it would always try to kill them. So kind of similar, maybe a bit of inspiration in there. I could totally see that. Really, really like it though. Really fun little story. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I sure did. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. I was a security guard for a store that doesn't exist, and what I saw will haunt me forever. 2 weeks of work for almost $6,000. How could I refuse? That was what I thought when looking at that bizarre listing in an email I had received. It said, temporary night security needed for local antique and clothes shop. 2-week contract, $6,000 upon completion of contract. I was shocked that it was still available when I had contacted the store. The owner had answered the call and had told me I was hired on the phone without even asking for any references or my resume. I had never actually worked security before, but I was on the larger side and trained in self-defense and knew how to aim a flashlight, so I figured I could give it a shot. I had just been laid off at my previous job due to downsizing, and even though security work is not my specialty, I told myself I would make it work for that sort of money. Part of me was thinking, even back then, what the catch was to be getting that much more than minimum wage, but beggars can't be choosers. I left with plenty of time to find the place and arrive without being late. It was a strange little store down a disturbingly barren stretch of road, almost 2 miles from the nearest shopping center. Kind of a bad place if they're trying to sell anything, but I guess it didn't matter as long as their money was good. I pulled into a dingy parking lot and saw a faded little sign that indicated the business was known as The Proud Tailor. They apparently sold antiques and old apparel. They must have made a solid business to pay this much for security. I wondered why it was so much and why it was only 2 weeks, though. I guessed that it didn't matter and got out of my car, taking my flashlight since it was already very dark and there was little in the way of parking lot lights out. As I walked through the lot, I almost walked right past the entrance. I had to turn back and do a double take. It was odd, but it almost seemed, when looking at it from the right angle, to sort of look blurry, almost like a heat mirage. I was interrupted from the strange daze when another car arrived in the lot. I walked over to it and met my contact, Mr. Jaspin. He regarded me curtly, thanked me for being on time, and then immediately, without skipping a beat, launched into a tirade of rules for this job that I felt would need a notebook just to write down and keep track of. Excuse me, sir, what? Was the first of many interjections I had made when hearing the bizarre tasks I was now expected to perform at my new, albeit temporary, place of employment. Yes, I know it sounds weird, but the owner is a pretty weird man, honestly. But he pays well considering. He put on his best appealing smile and continued with the weird list. I listened with increasing incredulity to this man, who, besides the owner on the phone, was the only contact I had made thus far when taking this job. After he had gone over 6 of them, I made a note list on my phone and had him repeat several of them. "Oh my," he said in a somewhat condescending tone. "I hope your observational skills are better than your listing ones." "Very well. Once more, here are the rules." I was annoyed by the insult, but was ready with my note app this time. Hours of security will be from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. No taking breaks in the store. Breaks must occur in the external security booth. Lunch break must occur at 2:30 a.m. and must not occur in the building. No touching of any merchandise. Especially no touching of displays. At 1 a.m. precisely, the customer bathroom must be inspected and cleaned if necessary. If there is trash in the receptacle near the back room, please dispose of in the locking dumpsters outside. No staring at any displays. Back room is off limits except in emergency situation. Trespassers are to be detained and are contact with the police if to be called to arrange removal. Is that all? I thought there was a lot, I said, half smirking and nervously laughing a bit after Mr. Jaspin had finished speaking. I gave up on humor when he glowered back at me and decided I should just listen. His friendly demeanor was broken, and he flatly stated that the rules are the rules for a reason. Keep to them, and there will be no problems. If you do not follow them, then we cannot guarantee you're safe. He paused mid-sentence and corrected. Cannot guarantee full compensation for the services rendered. Please abide by them at all times. He humorlessly bid me good night and left, leaving me alone in the parking lot without even having a proper tour of the inside of the building I would be guarding or any other type of orientation beyond the meticulous listing of rules. This was really weird, and I found myself wishing I had found something a bit more run-of-the-mill and less bizarre, even if it paid less. But I reminded myself of how much money it would be, and I decided to try and ignore the nagging feeling in my gut and get to work. Whatever that looked like here. I took a quick stroll around the perimeter of the store. It was not too big, but something about it made walking near and around it feel like it took longer than it should have. It felt like with how small it appeared from the parking lot, I could be around the building in 2 minutes flat. But somehow it took me 5 minutes to get back to the front where I had started. I brushed it off as maybe just being distracted by the new scenery and the barren surroundings. Perhaps as well the unerring darkness and quiet surrounding the place. At least without light pollution, the moon was visible, but it was faint, and everything was still very dark. I decided to head to the security booth and get set up. The security room, if you could even call it a room and not just a repurposed tool shed, was very dingy. At least it was well lit since it was so small. The single overhead light bulb made it so. There was a small CCTV which appeared to be connected to 3 security cameras positioned in the store. I went to switch them on, but they appeared to be dead. I saw a note attached below one of the monitors indicating that the cameras were out of service, and that a manual inspection of the building would be required at 1-hour intervals. There was an antique-looking brass key that I figured must be the store's key. I pocketed it and sat down. I was not sure what to do in the booth out here without working cameras. Just watch for people trying to break in around the lot, maybe? I figured I would patrol the perimeter every 30 minutes to get some steps in and see if anything was happening, in between checking in on the store and patrolling inside per the hour mandate mentioned on the note. I brought a few books to read while waiting between patrols, and tried to get comfortable on the hard steel chair I had been given to sit on in the security station. I thought that maybe they could afford to pay so much for the security job because they didn't spend a dime on any amenities for actual security personnel. After an uneventful hour of sitting in the security shack, as I started to call it, since anything more formal would be an insult to actually security stations, I realized I had to get up and head inside to do my rounds for the first time. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the front door again. I saw the strange distortion near it once more and wondered what in the world would cause that hazy effect. I hoped it was not a gas leak or something. I fumbled with the odd key for a moment and the door creaked open on loud hinges. It was freezing inside, somehow even colder than outside. I didn't think that was possible unless they had some sort of air conditioner on, which would be bizarre since it was winter. I was wishing I had brought a warmer coat, but I had a job to do, so I pushed inside through the frigid air and into the store proper. There was minimal lighting inside when it was closed. I was glad I had my flashlight, but still wished there were at least a few overhead lights I could turn on while patrolling. Every switch I had found appeared to be shut down, and no additional lights could be turned on. The main floor was not too large, and I decided to just do a circuit around the floor and then once through the middle and call it good. I took a small path to the right and passed some shelves with musty books and library paraphernalia. Rounding the corner, I saw some very disturbing-looking mannequins near the back wall. They were all wearing old-fashioned and ornate Victorian-era clothing. The faces and general air of the looming figures was very creepy, and I didn't like how, as I walked, the heads always seemed to be facing me. but I figured I was just a bit creeped out by the strangeness of this store and would get used to it on subsequent patrols. I saw near the mannequin wall a door and restroom sign and knew that was on my checklist. I thought I might just clear it now, but the rule said to check at 1 a.m. exactly, so I decided to abide by them and check back then. I kept walking, passing by racks of old clothes and wall displays of tools of relics and even weapons. I didn't see anything out of order on my rounds for the first time. At least, whatever order looks like for that weird store. I looked back briefly into the freezing store and closed and locked the door again, and returned to the security shack. I went through the motions several more times uneventfully. I had taken my break and just read straight through it. I thought about the break rule, and I didn't know who would be crazy enough to want to take a break or a lunch in that musty refrigerator with those creepy mannequins watching you. At 1 a.m. I checked the bathroom. It looked unused, and fortunately there was no mess to clean up. I was about to leave when I saw faint red stains near the basin of the sink. I turned on the water and used some antibacterial wipes to clean it away. I didn't know what it was, but it may have been blood, so best to take precautions. When leaving, the creepy mannequins caught my eye again, and I could have sworn I saw an odd red stain on the coat of one that was not there before. I took the garbage from the bathroom and I was heading out. I remembered I had to check the other garbage and looked by the back room door to see a portable garbage can. It was very heavy, and I wondered how they could produce this much waste in a day. I took both garbages out back and took them out to a sealed dumpster. Inside the heavy can was a triple sealed bag. It smelled pretty bad, and I didn't even want to know what kind of funky shit was in it. I pulled the lever on the dumpster to lower the tray and put the bulging garbage bag on, along with the smaller bathroom garbage. I pushed it back into place and heard a heavy thumping fall and kind of an eerie squishing sound. I don't even want to know, I thought to myself yet again that night. I returned to the security shack and sat back down. The rest of the first night was uneventful, and I was hopeful it would stay that way for the next couple of weeks, and I could just get my payday and not spend any more time in this bizarre place. The next 2 days were fairly uneventful, though the mundane nature of those 2 nights meant that when the hammer fell, I was too comfortable and was less prepared for the insanity of the next night. It was Thursday, my 4th night, and I had arrived a little late when I started my patrol. I had found broken glass out near the back where the dumpster was. I thought it was odd, but I was a bit more concerned when I noticed that amidst the glass was what looked like clothing fabric and traces of blood. This set me on edge, but I couldn't find anything else nearby, so I reluctantly returned to the security shack. I wished that I had been given a contact number besides the police line that, according to the rules, was meant only for when we needed to detain trespassers. I thought maybe I would make a note of it and ask Mr. Jaspin when I spoke with him next. It was time to go in the store and do my rounds. It was bitterly cold as usual, and I saw, as I was walking around, that some displays had been knocked over, and there was a bit of a mess in the aisles. It was strange that whoever had closed had not cleaned it up. I was told not to even touch the merchandise, so I didn't know if I should put it back or not. I decided in this case it might be okay. I was not going to steal anything after all, so I bent down and started collecting a few articles of clothes and placing them back onto the clothes rack. When I finished, I looked around and was shocked when the mannequins all seemed to be looking directly at me. Not just the ones on the wall who were already facing the center, but the other ones as well. I was getting a bit freaked out, and I started to hear a high-pitched buzzing noise as well. I resolved to finish up and get out of there as quickly as I could. Then I realized to my misfortune I had to use the bathroom just then. I ran away from the staring eyes of the mannequins and used the customer restroom where I always did, since the security shack had no facilities. When I finished, I decided to just take the trash out now and clean up the bathroom. It was only 11 p.m., but I figured I had already touched the merchandise, so why not just get the bathroom done while I was at it? One less thing to worry about later. The garbage by the back room seemed to be empty, so I left and returned to the security shack. At 1 a.m., I went back inside to do my rounds again. But something was off. The building was slightly warmer, and I noticed that a rather foul smell was coming from the bathroom. I had just cleaned there, I thought. How is that possible? I opened the door, and somehow the garbage was full of strips of bloody cloth and surgical needles, the sort of thing normally needed to be disposed of in a biohazard crate. There were other less obvious things in the bin, and after my disgust at the smell died down, I paused and became very concerned. I had already cleaned this out. How the hell did this get here now? Was someone else here? I suppressed a shudder and decided to step outside as I was leaving. I heard the smash of glass, and it sounded like it was coming from outside. I ran outside and saw a figure sprinting around the corner of the store. I dropped the bag of garbage and shouted, "Stop!" as loud as I could, but they raced on and I gave chase. They were moving so quickly I knew I couldn't catch up. Then they slipped on something and fell. As I caught up, I saw what turned out to be a small pool of some liquid. I raced over to the prone form and found a young man. He was panting hard, and what appeared to be blood was all over him. I didn't know if he was possibly a threat. He looked more scared than dangerous. But if he was desperate to get away, he could be unsafe, so I approached slowly. He was small and fairly young, maybe 18 or 19. He had no remarkable features besides a faint scar over his right eyebrow and some sort of tree branch tattoo on his right forearm. "Holy shit, dude, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing?" I asked him, out of breath and trying to regain my composure. "You," he started. "You have to help me," he blurted out, still panic-stricken about something. I didn't know what he was doing. All I heard was glass breaking somewhere, and he was there taking off running. His behavior did not seem to indicate vandalism, but why was he here? "Slow down and tell me what happened. Who are you and what were you doing here?" I asked him as calmly as I could to try and de-escalate the situation. Okay, just... He took a deep breath and continued. "Just please listen. I need to find my sister. She was at this store, or whatever this place is, when it was somewhere else, and she went missing." I listened to him as panic and frenzy started welling up in his voice again. "I don't know how this place is here, or why it is, but I need to find her before it's gone again." It looked like he was speaking sincerely, even though I couldn't make sense of it. "What do you mean, before it's gone again?" I asked. "This place, this weird store, it was in a shopping mall, this exact store." "You mean they moved here?" I tried to clarify. "No, this exact store," he shouted back at me. "Look, friend, I don't know what you think is going on here, but I assure you it is just us here. Your sister's not here. No one else is even here right now, and it looks like you're in a bad way," I said as I looked at his haggard appearance and the blood staining his clothes. I tried to calm him down and managed to take him to the security shack. I told him I would call the police line I was given and that they could help him find his sister. I didn't know if he was delusional or schizophrenic or something, but I figured I needed help in this case, so I finally called the number. There was a substantial wait, considering it was supposed to be a police line, and someone finally answered. "Stanton speaking," was the terse and fairly agitated voice on the other line. I explained the situation to him, and I thought I heard an annoyed groan suppressed on the other line, filled by a quick, "I'll be right over, hold him and wait," and the line went dead. "Real cheery fellow," I muttered sarcastically to myself. The young man, who still hadn't given me his name, was sitting on the floor in the shack, not taking his eyes off the main building. He wouldn't speak anymore, but the panicked look never left his eyes. I started to second-guess myself and thought maybe something was in there. I did not know for certain everything that was in that place. Like the back room, for example. Then I thought of the weird garbage I saw after I'd already cleaned it. I tried to break the awkward silence and I asked him about his tattoo he had. "That's cool. What is that supposed to be?" I asked him. He paused as if considering if he should answer, then he finally responded and said, "It's a hazel branch. My sister and I each have one in honor of our mother who passed away." We waited for a little over an hour. I was wondering if the officer was going to show up and consider calling the normal emergency services, but I didn't want to get into trouble if it broke the rules. I needed that money. It was almost my lunchtime, and I was getting hungry and impatient. I was about to call again when I heard a blood-curdling scream from what sounded like inside the store. Before I knew what was going on, the man stood up and rushed out and sprinted to the main door, taking the keys with him. He knocked me out of my chair and I fell hard to the ground. I didn't have time to stop him. He was in the store before I could get up and chase after him. Once I got to my feet and rushed for the building as I saw the lights of a patrol car approach. A large man stepped out. I didn't recognize the uniform. Something seemed off. Then I realized even though he wore a police uniform, there were not any identifying features on it, besides just looking like a generic police outfit. His car too, though it had lights, did not appear to be city, state, or county sheriff. I did not know what was up, but right then I didn't care. We needed to see what was going on inside with that scream and with the young man. I explained the situation, and the man, Stanton, as he said his name, looked at his watch and grimaced. Ah, shit, why did it have to be now? He looked concerned, and I was about to ask him what was wrong when he put a hand up and told me in no uncertain terms, "Thank you for the heads up. I will handle it from here." I was confused. Wait, handle it? Don't you need help in there? What are we going to do? I asked, trying to hide my own nervousness. No, sir, he responded curtly. It's 2:30 a.m., and you have a lunch to attend. In fact, for that matter, considering the situation, why don't you take the rest of the night off? It's not going to be safe in there, and the professionals will handle it. Wait, what? What do you mean? I stammered out. Someone is in there, and possibly someone else who needs help, or someone or something dangerous? Don't you need backup or something? I asked, feeling the tension increase. He paused for a moment, and looked very threatening as he shifted his gaze back towards me. I already called backup. They will be here shortly. Thank you again, but you have to leave now. But don't you at least need a statement or something? I asked, not wanting to be left out of whatever was happening, since something didn't feel right. I just took your statement. Now I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist. As he finished the statement, he rested his hand on the grip of his firearm, and I took the hint from there. This all felt wrong. I did not want to leave, but he had made it clear. I didn't have much of a choice. I considered calling the emergency line and checking if this guy was legit, but as I walked away, I noticed my phone was missing. I looked back and the man Stanton was speaking on his own phone. I couldn't hear everything, but I made out a few words. Dangerous and handled. I got to my car and was idling for a bit, when I heard a loudspeaker yell out that I needed to go now. This is a potential crime scene. Clear off or you will be prosecuted. Stanton called out by the door holding a megaphone. I took one last look behind, and I left. I still feel guilty about that decision. I didn't know what happened, but it all felt wrong. Maybe I could have done more. I did not hear anything in the news about what happened the next day, and was eager for any information. I considered calling Stanton again to see what happened, but I decided against it and called the line I had used to inquire about the position, and the line was disconnected now. What the hell was going on? I wondered. I arrived a little early just to see what happened. I thought the store hours should have seen it open right now, but it was locked up and no one was around. I wondered if they had been open at all today. I checked the security shack and, as expected, no note, no nothing, no indication of anything that had happened. I stepped inside for my first patrol, and I did not see anything amiss. The garbage was very full, but besides that, everything seemed spotless. I couldn't find anything wrong. No signs of a struggle, no one was around. What the hell happened here? I said softly to myself. I kept walking, and I heard a crunch under my foot. I thought I had stepped on glass, but I was shocked and somewhat horrified when I saw I had stepped on and crushed my own cell phone. I must have dropped it there, but I can't remember doing it. Besides, having a cracked screen, now it looked like it was covered in a dark brownish liquid. I shuddered when I brought it closer to my face and I smelled the metallic tinge of blood. What the hell? I looked around a bit more and couldn't find any other evidence of last night's events. I had a bad feeling something very wrong had happened here. At 1 a.m. I returned and checked the bathroom. It was spotless and no garbage was in there. I left, but I noticed the chill in the building had returned, and I swear I had seen a light from underneath the backroom door. Only one more work week. You can do this just one more week. I muttered to myself like a mantra and left. Surprisingly, the next 4 days did not have anything strange in store for me. Yet, because of how uneventful and mundane they were, it gave me a growing sense of dread that something was going to happen. Yet, day after day of tense anticipation, there was nothing. On the last day of all days, I saw the thing that I can never unsee. The thing that leads me to writing this account and trying to find any trace of that nightmarish hellscape masquerading as a quaint clothes store. It seemed like the last couple of nights at first, and I was grateful since after that night, I would be able to get my payday and be done with this sketchy store. On my first patrol, I took the garbage bin by the back room out since it was almost overflowing. It was incredibly heavy, and as I pulled it along, I must have hit a large rock with a wheel, and it went tumbling over. That very same rock, or friction, or whatever force in play must have succeeded in cutting open one of the normally sealed bags, and when it splayed its contents out, I thought I was going to vomit, pass out, or scream. Instead, I just looked on in horrified confusion, as there were what appeared to be pounds of bloody rags, rusted surgical equipment, and some strips of unidentifiable flesh. The gory bag was inexplicable, and my mind raced to try and find some explanation for the grisly contents of the bag. Was someone here doing illegal surgeries or something? What the hell is this? I thought of Mr. Jaspin and his creepy smile, the owner, who I had spoken with on the phone but never met in person, and the weird police officer, if he really was one. I felt panic sinking in at how I was involved in whatever this mess was, trying to help them guard whatever this place really was. I had not thought to arrive too early on any day except one, to check for sure. But when I didn't see any employees here, much less any customers. Hell, I'd never even seen this store open, if it really was a store. I was wondering if I was even going to be paid, or if something bad might happen to me. I left the gruesome bag where it was. I was not going to put my hands on potential evidence, but I realized in horror as I returned to the security shack that I had indeed done just that. Now, could I really tell someone else? No one else was here, just me and a bag of bloody evidence, something having happened. If something illegal was happening, how would I prove I was not involved? It's been just me here for 2 weeks. I thought of the young man too, the intruder, a few nights ago. I wish I knew what they had done with him. There were too many bad things that could have happened, and I felt sick at the implication of all of them. I felt guilty too, yet I did not know what I could do now, so I resolved to just finish the night and hopefully get paid, and then maybe put it in an anonymous report when I was done with these people. I sat and brooded, and became more and more paranoid as the night went on. I did not do my rounds around the store since I had no wish to pass that horrifying bag of organic detritus again. I decided near the end of the night to go into the store one more time and break one of the rules. I had to know. I had to know if someone was in the back room. Was there someone there the whole time at night? Were they responsible for the strange events that had occurred? At 5 a.m., on my last patrol, I summoned the courage to do it. I went inside, and it felt even colder than it had on previous nights. I slowly approached the back room door and bent down to see if I saw light on the other side. My suspicion was confirmed. There was a faint glow. I paused briefly, took a deep breath, grasped the handle, and slowly turned it. It was unlocked. The smell was awful, and I instinctively recoiled before going in. How had I not smelled this on patrol in the store? I had no idea how it could be this bad and not smell it through the door. Unless this was recent? I went into the nauseous miasma, covering my whole face as I did so. There was a bright lamp in the corner by the door that had been illuminating the area, and there were shelves with boxes and various office-like debris around. The back room stretched further down, a small hall to the left of the door, and I followed it. This room was not so well lit, so I pulled my flashlight back out and switched it on and almost dropped it and screamed. The light, as soon as it was switched on, was shining on 2 hideous mannequins, sitting on what looked like some sort of workbench. They were both sitting upright and staring straight forward as if watching the back room door for anyone who came in. I let out an exhale as I tried to calm down, realizing it was just more mannequins and regretting the action as I did since it meant I had to inhale more of the horrible air back there. Against better judgment, I stepped forward cautiously to get a better look. The faces on them were horribly lifelike, and something about it was morbidly mesmerizing. I leaned forward to get a look at the one on the left wearing a dark sleeveless jacket that looked fancy and expensive. The face was hideous, and somehow it looked like they designed it to be in pain or some other less describable emotion. The surface looked so realistic as well. It almost looked like it had human skin. Despite the awful appearance, something looked weirdly familiar, and I noticed an old-looking scar above the eyebrow of the thing. How would a mannequin have a scar? I was puzzled. I felt a rising sense of fear as I looked at the lifelike thing, and I reached out and touched the hand, and my blood ran cold. I felt the hand, and it felt warm. I could feel small hairs as well on the surface of the skin, and my mind couldn't handle what happened next. I looked further up the arm and turned it over to see on the forearm a small tattoo of what I recognized as a hazel branch. I remember trying to scream, but only a strangled gasp escaped my mouth. I looked to the female mannequin to the right and saw on its left arm the same tattoo. My mind couldn't reconcile the horrifying truth of the situation, and then, whether it was the breathing in, or the foul odor, or the disgusting coring of what I knew to be human bodies turned into these display cases of perversion, I vomited on the floor and nearly toppled over. I stood there, doubled over, panting and retching as I finally regained a bit of composure. It was then that the crowning horror occurred. I still don't know to this day if it really happened, or my disturbed mind just conjured in from the shock of the situation and the memory of speaking to that young man who had broken in that night looking for his sister. But as I stood, slowly back up, there was a splitting, tearing sound, like flesh and muscles breaking stitches, and I heard a wheezing, croaking voice mumble the words, "Join us." All semblance of sanity in that moment snapped, and I fled the store, grabbed my stuff from the security shack, and drove off as fast as I could, laughing like a lunatic at the impossibility of the situation. I didn't want to be implicated in the situation, so I made an anonymous call to the authorities about what I suspected was some sort of murder, body mutilation, or organ harvesting operation. I did not know if the owner, whoever he might be, would try and cover it all up, but I really was not expecting what I heard when I tried to follow up the next day. I was chastised for making a false report and was warned about wasting police time and effort. And how they did not appreciate being sent out to the middle of nowhere for serious crime allegations. I didn't understand, and I asked what they meant. Apparently, there had been an investigation, and nothing was turned up. Not because of a cover-up, because nothing was there to investigate. There was no store, no business registered at that location, apparently not even a building there, just an empty patch of land. I couldn't believe it. It was impossible. I decided to drive out there and check myself. To my complete shock, sure enough, everything was gone. Not just the store, but the sign, the dumpsters, and the security shack. Everything. It is like it had never existed. How could they remove the entire store in one night and make it look like it was never here? My mind was grasping at rational solutions, but I could conjure none. I tried calling the number I had called to inquire about the job again, but it was still disconnected. I double-checked the email I'd received the job listing from, and somehow it had vanished as well. I even looked online for the business, and all I found when looking for The Proud Tailor were some online shops that sold generic clothes. No odd Victorian-style clothes shops of that name in this city, this state, or even this country. Nothing. What could I do? No trace was left to investigate. No one will be able to find who owned or operated that nightmare building. There would be no closure for whoever their victims were. As far as the world seemed concerned, the store didn't exist. I started doubting my own sanity over the next few weeks. I wondered if somehow all that time had been some sort of hallucination or terrible lucid dream. Or more like a nightmare. I couldn't sleep for the last few days, so I started writing down the events as I remembered them. Whether they really happened or not. However, I received something today that gave me my answer, and I wish to God it hadn't. Because what I received is proof that it all happened, and I don't think I can bear the thought of those monsters still existing out there somewhere in the world wherever they went. What I received was a small manila envelope in the mail. It had no return address indicated on the front, but it was addressed to me, and when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. It was $6,000 in cash. Many of the bills looked tinged by a reddish-brown substance, and a small note simply saying, "Thank you for your services." And that was I Was a Security Guard for a Store That Doesn't Exist, and What I Saw Will Haunt Me Forever by Bad Andy the Red. This story was incredible. I mean, a crazy mystery store that like exists in certain locations, but clearly only for a short amount of time. It's untraceable. Clearly, there's some horrific things going on in there where they're turning people into mannequins and stuff. Oh my god, so good. There's so much detail. There's so much awesome information going on, but at the same time, it still leaves you with this horrific sense of like you don't really know what's going on. Oh, so good. That was such a good story. I really enjoyed reading this one. God, it makes me think of like it reminds me like I think there was like a Goosebumps story where there was a store that kind of did the same kind of thing. I'm sure this concept's happened a few times before, but still, it's always a great concept. Oh no, what was there's also oh god, what is it? There's like a house as well that does that. I think I saw it on Channel Zero. I think I can't remember, but it's definitely like a creepypasta kind of thing. But that was cool too. Either way, the story's awesome. I've really enjoyed this, and I really hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. 108 Willow Creek Drive. In the picturesque and seemingly tranquil town of Willow Creek, darkness is not merely the absence of light, it is an entity that permeates every corner, an unwelcome guest that sends shivers down the spines of every resident. Neither Willow Creek is not just a location on the map, it is a place where whispered tales of the supernatural intertwine seamlessly with the tapestry of daily life, leaving an unforgettable mark on the town's essence. It was a foggy evening, autumn casting its melancholic hues, when a young couple named Emma and David made the life-changing decision to move to Willow Creek, following their marriage. Their new abode, 108 Willow Creek Drive, an aging and decrepit house on the outskirts of town, was supposed to be their fresh start. Little did they know of the dark history surrounding this seemingly harmless domicile. The house exuded an unsettling aura, characterized by creaking floorboards and drafts that carried whispers through the night. As the shadows grew longer and the chill set in one evening, Emma stumbled upon a concealed room in the attic, a room colder than the rest, ostensibly humming with an unsettling energy. Within this mysterious space, she discovered an old weathered journal titled Samuel. Its pages were filled with the desperate scribblings of a previous occupant, revealing a harrowing tale of evil that had befallen the town. Dread washed over Emma like a crashing wave, and a sense of urgency propelled her to show the disturbing writings to David. However, as David entered the attic, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of Emma's stomach. She trembled in the hallway below, listening to David's reaction to the ominous writings. To her disbelief, he announced that the pages were blank. Emma snatched the journal from his hands as David descended the attic steps. Vigorously flipping through the pages, Emma's eyes widened as she realized that the writings had indeed vanished. This enigmatic occurrence only added to the unease that had already settled in their hearts. Emma and David found themselves caught in a whirlwind of bizarre phenomena in the ensuing days. Lights flickered inexplicably, shadowy figures darted in their peripheral vision, and eerie sounds reverberated through the house. In the corridor, footsteps echoed across the wooden floors at night. Yet, they found no one upon investigation. David, something is definitely not right. We haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since we moved in. It's been weeks, Emma cried out, her voice tinged with desperation. I admit it feels like something out of the ordinary is going on, but let's not jump to conclusions. Perhaps we're just letting the stress of the move get to us, David replied, attempting to offer solace as he enveloped Emma in a comforting hug. That night, Emma found herself entangled in a restless sleep. Amid her tossing and turning, a sudden chill grasped her ankle, jolting her awake to a ghastly sight. A tall, crooked, faceless woman standing at the edge of their bed. Paralyzed with fear, Emma watched in terror as the woman's featureless face slowly twisted from the center, contorting into blank eyes above a silent scream. Ah! Emma's scream pierced through the quiet night, prompting David to jolt awake in utter shock. What Emma, what's happening? You don't see her? Emma stammered, her entire body trembling in fear. See who? What are you talking about? David asked frantically. Her! Emma yelled, pointing frantically toward the edge of the bed. Blinking rapidly, David stares into the darkness at the edge of the bed, seeing nothing but the cabinets hiding against the walls of the dark room. Babe? I don't know how to tell you this, but there's nothing there. David, please! Something is terribly wrong with this house, Emma replied, tears streaming down her face as she clung to David for comfort. All right, let's try to rest for the night. It could just be a nightmare. Tomorrow morning we'll look into this. I promise. David reassured her, his voice attempting to quell her fears. Emma wiped her tears with a reluctant nod, and the two of them attempted to regain some semblance of composure and return to their restless slumber. As dawn broke on the following day, the couple found themselves in the heart of the town. Within its quaint library, sitting across from the town's historian, they were delving deep into the twisted history of their new home, Willow Creek, hoping to shed light on the darkness that had enshrouded their lives since they had crossed the threshold of 108 Willow Creek Drive. The historian began to spin a tale of eerie occurrences, sinister secrets, and the deep-rooted malevolence that had plagued the town for generations. Emma and David listened intently, their eyes widening with every chilling detail, as they realized the depth of the darkness that had trapped them within Willow Creek's clutches. It's time for tale number 2 of Willow Creek. The history of Willow Creek. It began centuries ago, when a group of brave settlers sought to establish a flourishing town. Nathaniel Willow, a natural-born leader, led this ambitious endeavor. Their motivations were driven by a desire for power and wealth, aspirations that led them to form a perilous pact with an enigmatic entity cloaked in darkness. This entity, hidden amongst the twisted trees, hungered insatiably for souls and offered the settlers untold riches in exchange for nourishment, ensuring the prosperity of the burgeoning town as long as its insatiable appetite was sated. As the sands of time trickled forth, the once thriving town began to wither under the ominous shadow of the entity's influence. Crops failed, children mysteriously vanished, and an evil presence permeated the air circulating through the streets. The townspeople bore the burden of this affliction in silence, shrouding their fear and grief, for speaking of the entity meant inviting unspeakable horrors. The entity's insatiable desires manifested through demands for sacrifices, selecting victims at its whimsical discretion. One fateful night, with the moon hanging low and crimson in the sky, young Sarah, the daughter of the town's mayor, fell prey to its vicious grasp. Sarah disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the harrowing echoes of her screams reverberating through the empty streets. Fearing the entity's wrath, the townspeople collectively turned a blind eye to the nefarious occurrences that plagued their once peaceful abode. However, one man, Samuel, could no longer endure the torment inflicted upon his community. Fueled by a determination to free Willow Creek from the clutches of this curse, Samuel delved into the forbidden archives of Willow Creek's history, unearthing the town's darkest secret. Armed with newfound knowledge, he embarked on a treacherous journey to confront the evil entity. The entity, wise to the threat posed by Samuel, unleashed a relentless wave of terror upon the town. Shadows danced ominously along the streets, unearthly shrieks pierced the stillness of the night, and the very air turned as cold as death itself. Samuel was compelled to barricade himself within the confines of his home as the suffocating terror inched ever closer. With the dawn of a new day, Willow Creek emerged from the shroud of darkness. The eerie shadows dissipated, and the chilling shrieks subsided. However, a grim scene appeared in the attic of a forsaken house. The lifeless body of Samuel sat propped against the wall, his face marred by blood trails, his jaw hung open, frozen in an eternal scream. I'm sure the two of you have put it all together at this point. That God-forsaken house is now known as 108 Willow Creek Drive. Although it may be a little too late, I'll warn the two of you. That entity doesn't take too kindly to new people living there. If you're asking me, I'd leave town instantly, before you're hooked in for not just life, but for generations. Tale number 3. The Curse of Willow Creek. In 1690, deep within the heart of the untamed wilderness of the New World, an enclave named Willow Creek endured as a testament to human tenacity and survival. Yet it was more than just a hamlet. It was a fragile bastion, teetering precariously on the brink of extinction. grappling incessantly with the relentless trials imposed by the unforgiving and harsh wilderness. With its vice-like grip, the environment subjected the people to a daily ordeal of survival. Their crops withered, their livestock perished, and the looming spectre of famine cast a dark and oppressive shadow upon the beleaguered town. In the midst of this tumultuous era, a figure named Nathaniel Willow rose to prominence within the community. Driven by an intoxicating blend of desperation and greed, Nathaniel was consumed by an unwavering determination to secure his town's prosperity and continued existence. One fateful night, when the moon obscured its luminous face behind a shroud of darkness, and the wind howled through the desolate streets, Nathaniel embarked on a journey deep into the heart of the forest. He clutched in trembling hands a cursed grimoire, an ancient relic passed down through countless generations of his lineage. Summoning courage from the depths of his soul, Nathaniel dared to unlock the secrets inscribed within the grimoire's pages. With a heart ablaze with fiery determination, he summoned forth famous Malum, a towering and grotesque demon whose eyes burned with pernicious intent. The demon snarled and interrogated Nathaniel's motivations, setting the stage for a pivotal exchange. "What compels you to release me?" The demon's words resonated ominously. In a moment of desperation, Nathaniel disclosed his desire to lead his town to prosperity and success, seeking the demon's assistance. Famous Malum, in all its sinister grandeur, proposed a malevolent pact. A pact that promised unimaginable wealth, bountiful harvests, and unparalleled prosperity in exchange for the souls of the townspeople, to be offered in a dark and unholy ritual. Driven by his insatiable thirst for power and success, Nathaniel succumbed to the allure of this wicked bargain. The deal was sealed, and the town of Willow Creek bore witness to an astonishing transformation. With the infernal pact in place, the once feeble town began to flourish. Crops thrived and multiplied. The settlement expanded, and the townspeople reveled in newfound affluence. However, as time wore on, it became clear the famous Malum's insatiable hunger could not be satisfied by sporadic sacrifices alone. The demon's unquenchable appetite grew, plunging the once thriving community into perpetual terror and despair. They lived daily on the precipice of panic, aware that the demon's return and subsequent demand for more souls was an inescapable fate. On stormy nights, when the heavens themselves seemed to weep in anguish, with lightning flickering across the skies and bone-chilling wind, famous Malum reappeared, casting a harrowing shadow over the beleaguered town. The earth trembled as the demon bellowed, instilling fear in the townspeople's hearts. Helpless, unseen forces dragged from their homes, their desperate cries echoing in the night. In the face of this abomination, Nathaniel, weighed down by guilt and remorse, attempted to resist the demon's insatiable demands. But his efforts were in vain, for the demon had come to claim what was rightfully owed. The air grew heavy with malignance as the demon feasted on the souls of the innocent, their anguished screams a haunting reminder of the wicked pact that had doomed Willow Creek. As the first rays of dawn broke, the once thriving town lay in ruins. Once a tightly knit community, its population had been reduced to a ghostly, hollow shell of its former self. The remaining townspeople huddled together, scarred but alive, bearing witness to the devastation that had engulfed them. Among them stood Nathaniel Willow, covered in the blood of his former followers, a man tormented by the consequences of his choices. In the aftermath, as the remnants of the town grappled with the enormity of the tragedy, a pair of crimson eyes vanished into the dense forest. The ominous words, left by famous Malum, hung in the air, a chilling reminder to Nathaniel and the survivors. Never forget your end of the bargain. Has anyone ever seen a deer do this? The below text is all copied from a now deleted post from an archived wildlife forum. My sister is a wildlife major, and she sent it to me because she found it so odd. Has anyone ever seen a deer do this? 11/19/2009. This is completely random, and I'm not sure if this is the right place for my question. But here goes. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house the other night. We hang out like every day, always with either one of us driving to the other's house and spending the entire day there, usually until after 10 or 11 p.m. Anyways, when I was driving back, I'd say it was a quarter after 11, but maybe later. I was going past a big field and I noticed a deer. We live in rural West Virginia, so we see deer like all the time, and it takes a miracle to not hit one every fall/winter season. I always pay attention to the deer when I spot them, to make sure they're not going to run out in front of me. But this deer caught my attention before I was even that close to him, because he was moving his head back and forth really fast. I noticed the motion of his eyes in my headlights, and he was standing maybe 15 feet from the road on my driver's side. Now, it wasn't a normal head bucking or something like that. I know next to nothing about deer, despite the area I live in. But I've seen them, dip their head and stuff when you get close to them. This wasn't that. I'll try to describe the motion as best I can. He was literally rocking his head from side to side, almost as if you could picture someone listening to music and bebopping their head from shoulder to shoulder, except this was way more dramatic. It was absurdly fast. He was rapidly forcing his head from side to side. Each time he would go all the way past a 90-degree head tilt and almost like trying to force his head entirely upside down. I can describe this in such detail because it surprised me so much that I slowed down as I passed him to look. I noticed that the speed didn't seem to change at all, and he didn't stop doing the head rocking whatsoever. It was continuously going back and forth, almost as fast as an excited dog wagging its tail. It looked violent and painful. When I went right past, I tried to look at the deer's face. He wasn't looking at me or my car in the way that they normally would stare. Deer in headlights look. He was looking sideways. His eyes were wide, I guess. I've really never spent time examining the appearance of a deer's facial features. Anyways, I guess I'm asking if this is normal for deer to do? Maybe it was just because it was so late at night and dark on the road, but I found it really unsettling. Truthfully, it creeped me out and I couldn't stop thinking about, which is why I'm writing this today. I couldn't find anything like it on Google. I need to ask somebody if this is just a really weird behavior that they do. Part of me feels like I should have stopped my car and checked on him. Part of me wants to go back and look for him. I'll go past that field again tomorrow when I go to my girlfriend's again, but I'm not sure if I should stop. I guess just tell me if this is normal or if it's dangerous for me to go look for him. Thanks. Update 11/21/2009. First of all, thank you everyone for the suggestions and info. I'm not sure exactly what kind of deer it was for those that were asking, but I'm pretty sure white-tailed are most of what we have here. So, against a lot of your suggestions that it could be rabbit or something, I decided to just quickly stop at the field on my way over yesterday. Right around the spot where I'm pretty sure that I saw it, I did find some blood and fur. Don't worry, I did not touch the blood. But there was enough blood that I could see it in pretty much trail that went toward the woods on the other side of the field. My girlfriend would kill me if I was late, so I had to head to her house before lunch. But I stopped again quickly on my way back at night. It was after 11, again, and I brought a flashlight. I followed the blood trail to the edge of the woods. I was really surprised by the amount of blood. I was actually wondering if maybe he got hit by a car and survived, or if he was rabid and attacked something else. Long story short, I was too scared to go into the woods at night, despite how much of a wilderness adventurer I was feeling like. My girlfriend is having a girls' day tomorrow, so I'm tempted to use my free time to go have a look-see in the woods during the day. Then again, I might just sleep. Your wildlife investigator, James. Update 11/22/2009. Alright, y'all. I was lazy and I did not go back to the woods. However, many of you are now invested in this adventure, which has made me also more invested. I have named the deer Charlie, and I am determined to find out what happened to him. Also, I am 20 years old, you all have been asking, because you were so interested in my story. One of you said, quote, "You want to know how old I am so you know how tragic it would be if I died in the woods." So, thanks for that. I'm going on Tuesday afternoon. I've got off work and the missus does not. Per your recommendations, I am taking bug spray, boots, a hiking stick, and granola bars, though I dare say this seems a bit dramatic. Onward for Charlie, James. Update 11/24/2009. Charlie is dead. When I wrote the last post, I was excited and interested. Now I am just sad. I guess with the blood and all, I should have assumed that Charlie didn't make it, but I can confirm that now. At least, I'm assuming it's Charlie based on the blood trail. Warning, gruesome content. The worst part is that Charlie was eviscerated. While he was still in one piece, technically, his neck and head were bent backwards over his body, his neck ripped open and revealing a ton of blood and skin and fur and his spine/bones. I'm no genius, but what I think is most weird is that if he was injured to his neck like this by a car, how on earth could he have walked all the way to this place in the woods? The woods he went into were at least 50 yards from where he was standing that I found the start of the blood trail, and I walked another 5 minutes into the woods to find his body. Can deer survive and run a football field with their head hanging off? Like a chicken? As I wrote that, I can't help thinking about the thing he was doing when I first saw him. The head rocking/tilting. This seems impossible, but his body almost looked like he had been doing the rocking so hard that he split open his own neck and died on the spot. Does that seem like something that rabies could cause? Update 11/30/2009. Thanks for all the responses, and all the rest in pieces for Charlie. Seems like none of you have an idea of what could have happened, aside from my guesses. I guess I'll check back on this thread occasionally to see if anybody has anything to add. But if not, I guess it's farewell for now. Retired wilderness adventurer, James. Update 12/09/2009. It happened again. This time I was driving to my girlfriend's house in broad daylight. Just across from the spot in the woods where Charlie was, but on the opposite side of the road, I saw a rabbit, sitting still, swinging its head back and forth in nearly the same manner. I immediately pulled over and got out of the car. I tried to slowly go towards it. I noticed that the swinging was very fast again, and violent in the same way that the deer's had been, although the bunny's neck was much shorter and he couldn't swing his head quite as far. I did see that he was already bleeding. I noticed it on his right side, just between his shoulder and neck. I got within about 3 feet of him before he took off, across the road, onto the field, and into the woods, in the exact spot where I knew Charlie's blood trail had led him. I'm writing this from our house. I'm too anxious to wait. I'm going to go back in after the rabbit tonight on my way home. Update 12/10/2009. After this, I'm not sure whether this thread is the right place for this adventure at all. I pulled over in the same spot as before. I checked the time. It was 11:11 p.m. last night when I left my car. I took my flashlight and headed back into the woods, in the same slightly stomped out trail from my previous visit. Charlie's dried blood was still there. After a few minutes' jog, Charlie's body was still in the same place. I looked around the area. It was nothing but dense woods. So I decided to continue walking in the same direction Charlie had been going. I walked into the woods for another 10 minutes or so, and was about to give up when I saw movement above me. I shined my light up, and there was a robin sitting on a branch. It was looking directly in the direction I was walking, not at me, and it was swinging its head furiously back and forth in the same way. The movement looked even more violent in a bird. It was sudden, rapid flutters of its tiny head from left to right and back again. I had to stand on my toes and wiggle my flashlight less than a foot below the bird to get it to fly away. It darted straight through the woods in the direction it was facing, and I had been walking, and I charged after it. I'm not sure how long I ran for, but I kept my light ahead and was able to get glimpses of the bird and keep up with it. Eventually it took me down a very steep hill, where I fell and slid sideways into a small clearing. It was the absolute strangest thing I'd ever seen in my life. The first thing I noticed was that there were animals all around me. They were all dead, and all in the same way as Charlie. There must have been dozens: birds, squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, skunks, possums, and even what looked like a mangy stray cat. All of them were lying in or around the clearing, with their heads snapped back toward their bodies and the insides of their necks on display. As I shined my light around, I noticed the second thing: the horrible smell. I'd smelled dead animals before, but never so many, and it was completely unbearable. I pulled my hood up and zipped my winter jacket tight all the way over my nose. I was freaked out. I could hear my heart beating, and I felt like I was hyperventilating. I vomited. I stumbled forward just a bit and noticed how the dead animals on the ground increasingly piled up, moving toward a single direction. As I stepped that way, I shone my light ahead. A few yards away, I noticed it. There was an outcropping of rock between two trees. Underneath the outcrop was a round opening. When I shined my light onto it, it did not reveal an end, but only the sides of rock. It must have been a pretty deep little cave. On either side of it, I noticed more animal bodies, until my light came across something bright blue. I walked over and saw that it was a bag. One of those little singe sacks, like you get from going to a summer camp or on a college tour. As I picked it up, I heard the sound of some pretty heavy rustling nearby, and that was too much for me. I took off, with the bag and flashlight up the steep bank as fast as I could. On my way out, I saw dead deer and I even think some dead coyotes that I had not observed on the run in. It took me a while, but my adrenaline was pumping, and I eventually burst out of the woods right onto the road. I'd come out about a half mile up the road from where I parked my car by the field. I jogged back to my car and did not see or hear anything else. When I got home and felt somewhat safe inside, I opened up the bag. There were writing utensils, some bookmarks, and a gray water bottle. Mainly, there was a little sketchbook. I flipped through it, and there were mostly some random drawings. Not very good, but good enough that I could tell the person liked drawing in their spare time. It was normal stuff, characters and scenery and such, until I got to the last non-blank page. There was a very strange drawing that I will do my best to describe. It was a large, somewhat human-looking shape. It had wide legs and feet, a triangular torso, and outstretched arms. There were only 3 finger shapes on the hands, and they looked long, like full carrots, and drooped straight down from the ends of the arms. The figure had what almost looked like wings, except that they came out of its back almost at the bottom, right above the legs, and dropped straight down as low as its ankles. Finally, in place of its head, there was a humongous hollow circle, 3 times larger than what you'd expect the head to have been based on the body proportions. The outside edges of the entire circle was littered with a bunch of smaller circles and dots. It looked utterly bizarre. Aside from the difference in style, it was drawn in much poorer quality than the rest of the pictures in the book. It looked as though it was hastily scribbled in with an unsharpened pencil. There were smudges and wet spots all over the page. Lastly, down at the bottom of the page were some really sloppy scribbles that looked like they read, Zeki 118. It eased me. I must see. Does anyone have any idea what all this could be? I have no words and no thoughts. I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm terrified. Should I call the police? The game wardens? This is literally all I could think about. I don't know if this is the best idea, but I want to go back to see the cave in the daytime. I'll take my dad's 12 gauge, in case I run into an animal or something that's been doing this. It might be terrifying, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something real. After I go, I'll call the game people to come get these dead animals. I'll update you all tomorrow. Wish me luck. Your wilderness adventurer / wildlife CSI, James. This is where James's wildlife thread ended. There were a bunch of commenters asking him for updates, but he never gave any. They never found any reports of a missing person named James in West Virginia. But one commenter did find someone named Daniel J. Shindley, whose middle name was supposedly James, but was 20 years old and reported missing in Maryland 2 weeks after James's last post above. Does anybody else have any info on this? Thanks. And that was Has Anyone Ever Seen a Deer Do This? By Aiden P717. This story's great. This story is so good because I've always enjoyed something that kind of speaks in like either a forum post or a diary entry that, you know, is kind of like you're looking into the past events of somebody or something. I also like the fact this story is incredibly strange, right? There's just a lot of, you know, weirdness to it. There's a good level of investigation, and then it just kind of stops. But it was thrilling. It was exciting. I was hooked. I was hooked the entire time because I was like, I want to know more of what's going on here. Like, this is a really strange thing, but you know, you never really fully get an answer. Although quite a few of the comments were talking about how maybe it's related to Ezekiel, maybe one of the verses in there, and some of them make a lot of sense, you know. So we'll definitely think about that, especially when you're talking about like potentially more biblically accurate angels, how they're not exactly humanoid, they're like a bunch of eyes and everything like that. So Ezekiel 1:18. Their rims were high and awesome, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. It could be related to cherubim, but since a number of the letters were missing, could part of the verse number be missing as well? I tried checking the 18th verses of the chapters with a 1, since I don't think Ezekiel has any ranging in the triple digits. Only one seemed relevant, 11:18. When they return to it, they will remove all its detestable things and all its abominations. It's referring to the removal of idols, but the way it seemed like these animals were all gathering in one location and torn open like something burst out of them, or might have been torn out of them. Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's really crazy. Really awesome. Really, really good story. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. See you for whatever's next. Take care. The Summer Vortex. My grandfather was a small-town detective from the time he was 26 in 1974 until he retired at 61 due to medical complications from being shot in 2002. I asked him if he had a crazy unsolved case, and he said that he did, and it was a whopper. A few months ago, I recorded him telling me that story, and then I transcribed it, but then I realized, it needed some work to be readable, so I cleaned up when I had time. So I'll tell you the case. But then I'll tell you something that changes everything about it. In 1986, Manita Bluff was experiencing a heat wave so severe that the mayor of the town ordered that all municipal jobs occurring in the outdoors be completed between the hours of 7 p.m. and midnight. The town's strict and historical noise ordinance was lifted, allowing residents to perform outdoor chores late into the night. Many businesses adjusted to the evening hours, and it was not unusual for residents to hike, walk, ride bicycles, or even swim in the dark hours. Nighttime calls for police presence had increased, and most officers were working overtime to help combat a wave of petty crime that seemed to erupt each night in the hour or so before dawn. Steve Polson was patrolling the streets in an older car that didn't have air conditioning, and he remembered using a cheap spray bottle to occasionally mist himself for relief from the relentless weather. Ice water from an insulated thermos helped take the edge off, but it also caused him to pull over at the small town's airport to use the restroom, where he found a strangely dressed woman. Despite the intense heat, she was dressed in long underwear and a wool ski sweater. She was alive, but hypothermic. Steve Polson called for an ambulance, and while the woman would live, what she told the detective would kick off a strange and unexplainable series of events. Jessamine Grayling had gone missing in early January. According to her husband, she had sighted coyote behind the airport and had taken her camera and a small day pack in hopes of capturing photographs she could sell to local publications. She had not returned by dark, and a search party had spent days combing the area for any sign of her. Bloodhounds indicated she'd exited her car, parked behind the flight school hangar, which reported to the police that she had just used their restroom, but then they lost her scent in the bathroom itself, as if she hadn't left. Jessamine's childhood best friend owned the flight school with her husband, and they agreed to all police requests, going so far as allowing the bathroom to be dismantled to prove that there were no secret places to hide Jessamine's body, and allowing their training planes to be impounded for nearly 6 months. The case had gone cold. Jessamine reported to police that she had, in fact, left the flight school restroom, and found the flight school completely empty. This was not entirely unusual. Students took the planes to go flying, and Jessamine had stopped in around lunchtime. She assumed the front desk cashier, one of the student pilots working off their lessons, had stepped out to the cafe for lunch, a theory that was confirmed by the student, who said they had been leaving when Jessamine arrived. Jessamine had locked the door behind her, as was the custom when no one was present. She then hiked up the foothills to the north of the airport and set up her camera. The next thing she knew, Officer Steve Polson was standing above her, shaking her and trying to wake her up. The heat was so intense that she thought she was experiencing late-stage hypothermia, which surprisingly, the hospital confirmed she was. She could not account for her long absence. Detective Daniel McRae, my grandfather, harbored many suspicions. The next day, he hiked to where she claimed she set up her camera. It was an easy half-mile from the airport, and he found her camera in good condition. Confoundingly, it wasn't sun-bleached as it should have been, nor had the cheap plastic tripod deformed in the blazing sun. Detective McRae knew that one of the searchers had carried a camcorder during the events, and he retrieved the tape. To his delight, but confusion, the searcher had recorded videotape of several locations that the police had deemed likely locations for a photographer, and the perch Jessamine had chosen was included. No camera was present at the time of the search. Though Jessamine's husband, Roman, had been cleared of any wrongdoing in her disappearance, McRae suspected that he was involved, as he was one of the few people in town who had access to a refrigerator large enough to contain a human and trigger hypothermia. Specifically, he provided delivery service for Schwann's frozen foods. He could have trapped Jessamine in his truck, but McRae couldn't explain her long memory gap and complete lack of fear of her husband, who had rushed to the hospital when told of her reappearance. McRae's theories crumbled when Roman Grayling provided a rock-solid alibi for both himself and the truck. His truck's refrigerator system had failed several days earlier, and he'd driven it to a mechanic nearly 100 miles away to be fixed. In the meantime, his home chest freezer had been filled with the contents of his truck. Careful examination revealed that none of the packages of food had been thawed and refrozen, as would be expected had he used the freezer on his wife. The only clue in the mystery were 2 large puncture wounds on Jessamine's neck that had healed but scarred, wounds that had not been present before she vanished. Mere days after Jessamine's reappearance, Steve Polson would again encounter a missing person who had no memory of the months between their disappearance and reappearance, and presented no clues but puncture wounds on their neck. James Hackney was a 19-year-old ne'er-do-well who had gone missing in the first half of May. His mother initially thought he might have hitchhiked to find work, but when he didn't call home in the subsequent 2 weeks, she reported him missing. James would claim that he'd hitchhiked only as far as Tenet Rock, a town about 25 miles away from Bonita Bluff, where his friend had offered him $40 to help with a fencing job. James said he'd caught a ride with a man who looked a little like Clint Eastwood, if Clint Eastwood were older, driving a blue Chevy Silverado. They'd stopped at the airport, and James had stepped out of the truck to pick up an unusual piece of glass he saw along the side of the road. As Clint and James headed out of town, James showed the unusual glass to the man, who told him it was bad luck, and he should get rid of it. James said he didn't want to, and the man stopped the truck, demanding James get out. James did, and then remembered nothing else. Detective McRae initially suspected that James was telling a tale that matched Jessamine's for sympathy and to cover up one of his many flights of fancy and petty criminal undertakings. But the 2 puncture wounds on James's neck were hard to ignore, as Jessamine's had not been reported, and she and James did not know each other. James could not explain the marks, and did not even realize they were present until they'd been pointed out to him. But the most confusing reappearance has yet to come. On the last day of the heat wave, mere hours before storm clouds reached town and delivered a scouring rainstorm, Betty Warrens, a housewife who had gone missing nearly 10 years prior, reappeared right before Steve Polson's eyes. Betty's disappearance in October of 1976 had been sensational news because of rare video footage. While video evidence is common in the current day and age, it is rare in older cases, and in fact, only the bank in Bonita Bluff had a security camera. However, Betty's neighbors, 2 doors down, had been filming in their front yard, and they caught her disappearance on a tape. On the footage, her car can be seen departing the hamburger stand where she'd picked up dinner for her family. Then it could be seen cutting through a grocery store parking lot. A few moments later, Betty and her spotless Chevrolet Malibu wagon had simply disappeared from film footage. Present in one frame and gone in the next, as if removed by movie magic. But forensic investigation had revealed that the film had not been tampered with. Her reappearance would be all the more sensational. Steve Polson lived in the house next door to Betty's former home, and as he smoked a cigarette in his car before leaving for his shift, Betty's car appeared out of nowhere and crashed into his brand new Nissan Sentra. After determining she was uninjured, he smelled the burgers in her car and saw the bag from Duchess Burgers, the burger stand just a few blocks away from their homes. He found himself intrigued, as he knew that Duchess Burgers has suffered an electrical fire several days before and weren't due to reopen until the next week. A review of her license, registration, and insurance revealed each was a decade old, but the paper was unyellowed, unaged. Betty, a lifelong sun worshipper and avid follower of fashion, was similarly frozen in time. Her outfit perfectly matched the description of the clothes provided by her daughter on the fateful day she disappeared. As with the other victims of what would later be referred to as the Summer Vortex, she had 2 neat, perfectly healed puncture wounds on her neck. No memory of the time she was missing, and in fact, no idea that any time had passed at all. Steve Polson, at this time, shared with Detective McRae that he feared that he was somehow uniquely attached to these cases. He simply could not determine how. He did not know the victims, he was not related to the victims, and yet he seemed to be at the epicenter of the events. He sought to remove himself by transferring to the sheriff department of a nearby county. Even so, he'd be called back to work these cases time and again. Betty would disappear again after leaving Bonita Bluff. Again, her Chevy Malibu would be seen on camera, this time in front of a gas station about 12 miles from her destination. In one frame, she is clearly at the pump. In the next, the car is gone. Again, the tape was examined for tampering, and non-tampering was found. However, the tape was determined to be old, and the system unreliable. Still, the cashier at the time did not recall Betty or her car present on that night. Betty was declared dead in 1990 by her daughter. But Betty's story did not end there. In 1996, her Chevy Malibu was found abandoned at the same gas station where she'd vanished a second time. 2 very small holes had been drilled in the radiator, draining it dry. Handwritten notes on how to find her husband's home sat in the passenger seat, alongside a receipt for coffee from a long-closed McDonald's location. The coffee was still hot, in a cup design McDonald's hadn't used in years. But Betty was nowhere to be found. A later investigation by a private investigator revealed that in 1997, a woman matching Betty's description had walked into the gas station, used the bathroom, and then gone outside. After a few moments, she stepped back in and asked the cashier if they'd seen someone drive away in her Malibu. When the cashier told her that no, he'd not seen the car leave, she told him that she would just walk the rest of the way and left. Unfortunately, the security camera wasn't working at the time, and the story cannot be corroborated by video evidence. In 2003, James Hackney vanished off security footage taken at the local jail. In the footage, he clutches his neck, leans forward off a chair, and then, in the next frame, he's simply gone. He had been held for public intoxication and was due to be released in about 15 minutes. Law enforcement did not suspect that it was an escape attempt. In order to determine what might have happened to James, an attempt was made to find and contact Jessamine Grayling, who had left town in 1988. Unfortunately, both she and her husband had passed away in a vehicular crash that only served to deepen the mystery. They had been found in 2001, clearly victims of a serious head-on collision with a similarly sized vehicle. However, they were found alone on a remote stretch of Black Creek Road. While there were tire tracks that indicated that they had swerved and applied the brakes of their own vehicle, there were no tire tracks, no parts, no evidence at all of another vehicle at the site of the crash. Forensic analysis has revealed that the car that crashed into them should have gone to the right, off the road, and deep into an adjacent ditch. But no tire tracks and no vehicle capable of creating the damage observed in the scene could be found. Investigators were unable to find a vehicle damage in a way consistent with the crash, nor any other victims. No hospital within reasonable distance reported any injuries consistent with a head-on collision of sufficient force. Steve Polson had left law enforcement in 2002, but he returned to briefly aid in this case. However, his investigation left him with only one theory. The Graylings were the cause of the crash, and the real victim simply cannot be known, as the time and the date for the crash can only be known for one car. Detective Daniel McRae recalls that Polson, who had retired as a detective, felt no other answer fit the evidence they'd found within the Graylings' car. While the Graylings had never been reported missing after Jessamine's reappearance in 1986, the documents in their vehicle were dated 1995. No money was found on them or in their belongings that was from later than 1995. And Roman's pill bottle for heart medication was also dated 1995. To Polson, it was clear that they'd vanished in 1995, to whatever time warp had taken Betty, James, and Jessamine. What wasn't clear to him was when the accident had occurred. Had it happened before they vanished? It seemed unlikely that it would have gone unreported, but Polson found now accidents occurring on that stretch of road during 1995. A man reported hitting a moose in 1996, but then the next accident on the road would be in 2000 between 2 trucks. Clearly not Graylings. Polson could only conclude that the accident that killed the Graylings was caused by someone in the future who had not yet been injured. Betty reappeared in 2006, waking up the residents of the people who then occupied the home that had belonged to her husband in 1986. They allowed her to use their phone and she spoke to police. Daniel McRae and Steve Polson both spoke to her and confirmed that they were quite sure it was her. Her husband, suffering from early onset dementia, was unable to ID her. But her daughter provided DNA samples and picture which proved that Betty was who she said she was. Unfortunately, realizing that her life was simply gone, Betty walked away from her daughter's home, this time seemingly vanishing of her own accord. James Hackney reappeared in 2012. The puncture wounds on his neck spontaneously bled for months after the fact. No reason for this condition was found. He shared the funny glass he'd found with the police, who feared it might be toxic or radioactive, but it proved to be nothing more than a broken piece of the old airport lighting system. Steve Polson died last year. He was found in the ditch on the side of Black Creek Road, his car totaled by damage consistent with the accident that killed the Greylings. He had 2 puncture wounds on his neck, unhealed, still bleeding. But come back to the present day. As I was making dinner tonight, I noticed something. I have 2 puncture wounds on my neck. Neatly healed, not bleeding. I'm usually a calm person, but my chest began to pound. My vision swam, and for some reason I felt like I needed to hide it from my grandfather. I pretended I'd gotten hot sauce in my face, and I finished up making our stir-fry. I didn't touch those buggers, though. I wanted to. I didn't ask any questions, but you better believe I wanted to. I sat through dinner with this gnawing feeling that something in my life really wasn't right. And then after dinner, when my grandfather sat in front of the television, I reread what I wrote about the Summer Vortex, and tried to understand how I could have 2 puncture wounds and no missing time. I've never vanished. I've never reappeared. But then I looked at the date on my phone. It's not 2018, and it hasn't been for a while. I think my grandfather, Detective Daniel McRae, knows what happened to all of us, me included. The Whopper isn't the story. It's the lie that it's unsolved. And I'm terrified I'm going to vanish forever if he finds out I suspect anything. Which I'm pretty sure he already does. And that was The Summer Vortex by Small Tomatoes Books. This story is so cool because it's this amazing retelling of events that happened in the past, which happened not just once but multiple times to multiple people over a number of years. Obviously, a couple of the first thoughts in my mind is, well, puncture wounds on the neck, that sounds like a vampire kind of thing, but a vampire that can make people disappear for a random amount of time, really bizarre. Also, why bring them back? There's so many strange things about this. Also, the fact that you had Betty, her car, the burgers, everything. It was literally like it was in one time and then immediately in another time. Just so strange, so very fascinating and interesting. I really do not know what could cause such a thing, but I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I really hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. I let something into my house. I've lived in this house for almost a decade. We've never had the slightest hint of paranormal activity. No phantom footsteps, no slamming doors, no shadow people, nothing. Until yesterday. I'd had a weird day. I'm a psychologist, and I had a somewhat stressful session with a teenage girl. Obviously, can't get into specifics because of privacy and all that, but it was stressful. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but on my way home, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror. It was just instinct. There was no one tailgating me, flashing their high beams or anything. In fact, I was alone on the winding country road that led up to my house. I just kept glancing in the rearview mirror without even thinking about it. When I got home, the house was chaos, as usual. Our daughter was running around with stickers, putting them on everything. My poor husband was hopelessly unsticking each one at about half the speed he was putting them on. Need help? I asked. No, but could you make some chicken nuggets? I walked over to the fridge, and that's when I saw it. There was a dirty handprint on the freezer door. But the problem was, the hand was small, yet too high up to be my kid's. I stared at it for a second, confused. I guess Seth was carrying her, and she touched the fridge. I grabbed the dish towel and rubbed it off. We got Lily into bed around 8. I was nearly falling asleep as I read her a story. As I said, it had been a hard day. My words drawled as I read Goodnight Moon for the zillionth time. My arm felt like lead on the pillow. But then Lily said something that woke me right up. "Mommy?" she said. "Who's the girl in the fireplace?" I looked down at her. "Huh?" "The girl in the fireplace," she repeated, indignant. "Who is she?" My throat went dry. "There's no girl in the fireplace." "There is," she insisted. "The girl with no face. She was sitting in the fireplace." "Okay, let's go to bed," I said, though my heart was pounding. "Time to sleep." After she fell asleep, I asked Seth about it. "Didn't say anything to me about it," he said, "but that's creepy as fuck." "I know." I wanted to just go to sleep and forget about it, but eventually my anxiety got the better of me. Sometimes we leave the door unlocked. Sometimes Sammy, the girl a few doors down, comes over unannounced to play with Lily. What if she got stuck in the fireplace or something? What if she's asphyxiating in there right now? The logical part of my brain knew that was ridiculous. I would have seen police cars outside their house. Tanya would have called me to see if Sammy was over here. There would have to be like 5 super unlikely things that would all have to happen for Sammy to be trapped in our fireplace, dying. Still, I had to go check. "I'm just going to check the fireplace," I said, starting for the door. Seth laughed. "She scared you." I'll be right back." "I'm sure it's nothing. Lily says weird shit all the time." I walked downstairs and turned left into the darkened family room. I reached for the switch and flicked on the light, just in time to see thin strands of long black hair retract into the chimney. I froze. My skin prickled. I couldn't move as I stared at the fireplace, the place where I'd just seen... No. Could it really be? That would mean someone was inside the chimney, hanging upside down. I finally sucked in a breath. "Seth!" He shot down the stairs. "What's wrong?" he asked as he ran into the room. "Someone's in the chimney. I saw their hair." Seth frowned. I could tell he didn't really believe me. "Okay," he said slowly, calmly. He approached the fireplace. "Hello?" Nothing. He paused for a second. Then he grabbed the fire poker and got on his hands and knees. Gripping the poker in one hand and his phone with the flashlight on in the other, he slowly pushed his head into the fireplace and looked up. "There's nothing there," he said. "The flue's open, though, so good thing we checked." He pulled his head back out and closed the flue. It clanged shut. "I didn't open the flue," I said. "Neither did I. I guess we left it open after the last time we lit a fire, which was... shit. Like 2 weeks ago? Man, that's probably like $50 a heat we've been paying for." He started for the stairs. "Are you sure there was nothing there?" "Absolutely positive," he replied. I swallowed. Had I imagined it? As a psychologist, I knew the brain is a funny thing. A bit of hair or dust in our peripheral vision can seem like a face or a shadow person to our brain. Our brains are programmed to recognize faces, humans, danger, like seeing faces in patterns, pareidolia. I got on my hands and knees and looked up into the chimney, just to make sure the flue was closed. Then I headed back upstairs. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep. But then I heard it. A muffled, metallic clang, coming from inside the house. I shook Seth awake. As he was getting his bearings, I ran over to Lily's room. Relief flooded me as I saw her fast asleep in bed. Seth stumbled into the hallway. "What is that?" he whispered. I don't know. Should I call the police?" This sound was louder than the others. And then, coming from our family room. Seth ran down the stairs. I heard his footsteps recede into the family room. And for an agonizing moment, there was silence. Then he shouted, "Call the police, now!" When the police arrived, I realized why he was so panicked. There were sooty footprints on our family room floor. Bare feet, small like those of a child. They wound in a sinusoidal pattern until fading and disappearing when they got halfway across the room. There were no footprints leading back, and the flue was open again. I don't know what to do. The police didn't find evidence of anything. They insisted the footprints must have been caused by Lily. I know they weren't. She was fast asleep, and she told me she didn't make them. And I keep thinking back to that stressful session I had with the teenage girl. During the session, she was upset, and she grabbed my hand. A little weird and boundary crossing, but she was crying and desperate for comfort. When she finally removed her hand, there was this blackish, sooty smudge on my hand. I'd figured it was just some eyeliner or mascara or something, even though she looked like she wasn't wearing any. Now I'm not so sure. This morning I dialed her number to schedule her next appointment, and all I got was a robotic voice telling me the number had been disconnected. And that was I Let Something Into My House by Blair Daniels. It's another fantastic little story from Blair Daniels. It's what I like about it is that it's more of an impending sense of dread, like the curious things of like, did you actually see what you saw? You're not entirely sure, but there's a sort of evidence of something that is making you believe that there is something, but it's not hard enough evidence, to be like, oh my god, we're definitely being haunted by something. It's just like a sequence of bizarre coincidences that kind of line up. But even so, I mean, when you really think about it, you have this. I mean, she saw the hair in the chimney. I thought that was a creepy thing. You had the daughter who saw a faceless girl in the fireplace. But you got all these weird little. Oh, it's so good. It's just eerie. It just sinks into you. This is it's just brilliant horror. This is 100%. It's just so good. It is so good, and I'm so glad I got to share it with you. There are definitely some other ones by Blair Daniels we're going to be covering. I'm going to obviously spread them out so I don't overdose you, because I think that's that's only polite. We gotta give everybody their moment in the light. But I'm looking really forward to reading some more of these. Oh my god, I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I really hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. What really happened at Site 94? Some of you may have heard about the Site 94 incident. Police investigated the laboratory of a small pharmaceutical company in Montana that had mysteriously lost connection with the rest of the company. They found everyone in the lab dead. The scientists, the test patients, everyone. All dead. Even the pet bird kept in the lobby. Officials stated that the deaths were to be attributed to a gas leak, and not a single person who worked on the site survived. Well, the officials are lying. I know they are, because I used to work there. I'd just gotten out of college. My uncle who worked at the company was pretty high up on the corporate ladder, was able to get me a job there. An entry-level job, and I'd have to move to work there. But the pay was good, and I'd always dreamed of living out in the countryside. Why not? I thought. What's the worst that could happen, right? Work my way up the ladder, eventually become so important I can live anywhere I want and still get paid well? It'd take a lot of work, yeah, but it'll be worth it. My first 5 months on the job were fairly uneventful. I got the routine down and learned about what it's like to work at a real lab. It's stressful, which is to be expected, I guess. The head scientist at the site was Dr. Richard Fulkrug, a brilliant, kind, seasoned scientist who made a name for himself working on cancer research in Switzerland. He helped me in my first weeks to get acquainted with the system. I would have probably been fired long ago if not for him. Dr. Fulkrug had a dream. He'd talk about it nonstop, at lunch, at closing time. I have to admit I respected him a lot for it, and he wanted to cure psychopathy. He had a cousin who was diagnosed as a psychopath. and thus he's dedicated his entire life to curing it, researching everything he could. But according to him, the company wasn't willing to give him the assets to cure something that couldn't be cured. So whenever he talked about it, we all just kinda rolled our eyes. On September 16th, 2022, about 4 months into my job, everything changed. I had arrived at my usual time. We didn't usually start researching until noon. We'd have briefings on the day's agenda at 10, have a quick lunch at 11, and then head to work. I was in the lobby chatting with the security guard. His name was Larry. He was a chill dude. He spent some time in the army, eventually got into working as a security guard. We enjoyed just talking while people streamed in, having a cup of coffee. It was a nice tradition. At around 9:32, Dr. Fulkrug runs in. He's in an awfully cheery mood, giddy like a schoolgirl. Me and Larry exchanged odd glances as he ran past, presumably into his office. "What the fuck was that all about?" Larry whispered to me. "I don't know. Should I go see?" I replied, gesturing to where his office was. Larry nodded, and with that, I headed to his room. I tapped lightly on the doorframe. "Come in," I heard Dr. Fulkrug say. I tentatively entered the room. "Is everything all right, Dr. Fulkrug? You were in quite a hurry to get into your office." Dr. Fulkrug motioned me to come over to his side. He said, "Everything is quite all right, my friend. I am elated, filled to the brim with joy. Just read this email and you'll see what I am so thrilled about." I hunched over to read the screen. "Dr. Richard Fulkrug, after careful consideration, the decision has been made by the board to greenlight your project to cure the mental illness of psychopathy." Dr. Fulkrug, that's fantastic. You can finally do what you always wanted to do. I'd never seen Dr. Fulkrug smile as much as he had that day. About 1 month passed without a change to our schedule. I chilled in the lobby with Larry, went to conferences, then got to research. The agenda was usually working on COVID-19 cures, sometimes being allocated to other departments. One night, though, I received an email from Dr. Fulkrug that read, "Dearest colleagues, the company has agreed with the local Saywood Asylum. They have agreed to transfer 1 patient dealing with psychopathy to Site 94. If you have received this email, you have been allocated to the research group on curing this subject. I expect all of you to be here at the site tomorrow by 9 to oversee the transfer." I smiled to myself. Fulkrug had finally done it. I couldn't sleep at all. Thoughts of what would happen tomorrow ran through my mind. Arriving at 8:30 a.m., there were already some people there. Larry was there as always, and Dr. Fulkrug was there, gleaming with joy. Dr. Calvin, Dr. Fulkrug's assistant, Dr. Allison, and Dr. Bisaka. Everyone was buzzing with excitement. Finally, at 9, we saw a truck with the ensign of the Saywood Asylum roll into the parking lot. 2 guards stepped out and went to the back, opening the door and motioning for the patient to come with him. A man exited the van. He had a shaved head, and his hands were bound together with handcuffs. I instantly recognized him. He was Jeff Harrison. Now, anyone who knows anything about the modern criminal history of Montana knows Jeff Harrison. In 2013, he was a normal member of society. He had a nice, well-paying job, a loving wife, and 2 beautiful children. However, on December 29th, he just snapped. He went crazy and killed his entire family. After he killed them, he wandered the streets, covered in his family's blood, and tried chasing anyone he saw. The police were thankfully able to apprehend him before he was able to hurt anyone. He was diagnosed with severe insanity and condemned to the Saywood Asylum. No wonder there were so many guards. I counted about 6 following him. Dr. Fulkrug went out to meet them. I didn't catch the conversation, but I guess one of the labs had been converted into a temporary holding cell, because that's where he led them. Jeff didn't seem to be too eager to have a conversation. He ignored Dr. Fulkrug's questions, looking down at the floor. At 1 p.m. we got to work on the cure. I had no idea how to go about it, but Dr. Fulkrug did, so we all just followed their lead. Dr. Fulkrug claimed that if we made a pill that made the body stronger, we could make the body so strong that it beat the mental illness. I've never heard of this idea. If it was true, then why hadn't it been done before? I had so many questions, but I trusted Dr. Fulkrug. He knew what he was doing, so I'd just shut up and enjoy the ride. After all, being part of a group that cures a mental illness, that will certainly help me in life. The first couple weeks were just researching. At first, it looked like everyone had doubts, and nervous glances across the room. But at the end of the day, Dr. Fulkrug was the most trusted man at the site. Nervousness was put to the side as we went to work. The prototype pill was fed to Jeff in late November. The pill certainly had some results. Jeff experienced heightened awareness and a brief episode of sanity. At that time, he and Dr. Fulkirk held a conversation. It was tragic. Anyone who had not known Jeff's past at that moment would have assumed he was a respected man in society. He was well-spoken and well-educated. I would have thought he was just a scientist who worked here. But it didn't last. About an hour into his episode of sanity, he reverted to his condition and attempted to lash out at Dr. Fulkirk, but was held back by the guards, who were ordered to stay at the site as defense. It was a miracle. Despite the disappointing end, we were invigorated to continue research. This was going to work. In the second half of December, a new pill was created. When exposed to it, Jeff seemed to have a quicker reaction time, turning nearly immediately at the sound of the exterior door opening to enter Dr. Fulkirk. He then experienced a full day of sanity. He was allowed to stroll through the garden outside and eat in the cafeteria with us, albeit heavily guarded. At 11:06, he reverted once again. He was subdued and put back in his cell. An internal debate began in the group. 3 scientists, led by Dr. Allison, believed they had done all they could. A pill that cures them for a day is already fantastic. It could be sold as a pill that's taken daily, it would help the patients, and also secure continuous profit for the company. But Dr. Fulkirk disagreed. This wasn't about profit. This was about helping these people, and the only true way to help them was to make a pill that cures it permanently. Eventually a vote was held, and Dr. Fulkirk's plan won 9-2. I voted for Fulkirk's idea. Over the next couple of months, we worked hard on the super pill, as Dr. Fulkirk called it. This was going to be the one that cured it. The pill failed many times. Each time Dr. Fulkirk was more visibly frustrated than the last. Finally, on March 25th, the pill was finished. The pill was planned to be tested on the Friday of next week. Though the pill was finished, it had to be analyzed to make sure it was right. It had to be perfect. On Thursday, I fell ill. A bad pizza had me stuck in bed vomiting into a bucket. I contacted Dr. Fulkirk to tell him that I would have to miss the test. He was sympathetic but understood and wished me a speedy recovery. I groaned. I had worked on this pill with the group for months, and I wouldn't even be one of the first to see the fruits of our labor. Or so I thought. At 2:21, I received a FaceTime from Larry. Groggily, I picked up the phone. "Dude, we're about to start the trial." I sighed. "Larry, I'm kinda sick." Yeah, I know, but come on, man. You helped the scientists work on this, you deserve to see it." Larry flipped the screen of the camera. Jeff had been fed the pill. Dr. Fulkirk entered the room. "Hello, Jeff. Are you there?" Fulkirk said tentatively. There was a brief silence, before finally Jeff responded. Hello, Doctor. I am here. How are you today?" The ensuing conversation was fairly run-of-the-mill. They discussed the pill. Jeff almost cried tears of joy. He had been freed from a curse that had robbed him of his life. He explored the facility in depth. He was shown the lab where the pill had been made. Jeff tried to open the door, but the handle was crushed in his hand. "What the?" "Oh yes, that's how the treatment worked. We had to strengthen your body so that it could fix itself. In all the others, we raised awareness in the mind and reaction time, but those would only result in short-term solutions. By increasing the strength, we've given the body the strength to resist it. It will certainly take some adjusting to, but eventually you'll be able to live a normal life without any hiccups." "I see." Suddenly, I heard a crash. Larry flipped the camera to me and said, "Hang on, dude, I'll call you back." And then he hung up, leaving me alone, utterly confused about what happened. I never received a call back from Larry. I figured he was busy, but something didn't quite sit right with me. I waited all weekend, waiting for his name to pop up on my phone, but it never did. On Sunday at 7 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. I opened the door and 2 men in suits were waiting there. "Hello. You are Weston Adams, correct?" Yes, that is me. What seems to be the problem?" I peered at the officers, trying to figure out what branch they were. They didn't look like police, but I didn't recognize the badge on their shoulders. "May we step in?" The agent's request broke me out of the trance. Yeah, sorry, it's not well organized." "It's fine, we've dealt with worse." I motioned them onto the couch, and they took a seat. I noticed the blonde-haired agent set a recording device beside him and turned it on. The brown-haired one then spoke. Dr. Adams, we are of the understanding you worked at the local lab, Site 94. Is that correct? That is correct. Why? The two agents exchanged glances. There was a strange silence, and then finally, the blonde one spoke. There was an incident in your lab. I'm sorry, but all of your colleagues are dead. The news hit me like a brick. Larry, Dr. Fulkrug, all of them. Dead? It couldn't be. I had been talking to Larry just a while ago. It felt surreal. I felt something rising in my throat, which I finally let out. What happened? The brown-haired one pulled out a manila folder. Giving him to me, I opened it and was shown the mugshot of Jeff Harrison. From what our agents on the field were able to understand, your lab was working on a cure for the condition of Jeff Harrison. Is that correct? Yeah. We were working on developing a cure for psychopathy. It was spearheaded by Dr. Fulkrug. What happened? We've been able to piece together what we believe is a timeline of what happened. At 2:20, a pill was given to subject Jeff Harrison. The pill, from what I gather, increased the body's strength in an attempt to hold his illness from controlling the brain. This worked for a time, but then at 2:35, it halted. The normal brain state took back control, but the abnormal strength did not. The patient went into a state of uncontrolled rage and killed everyone present at the facility, including Dr. Fulkrug. He then escaped through a window, and his current whereabouts are, as of now, unknown. That was a lot to take in. Everyone? Everyone but you. Which is why we came here. Why were you absent on that day of all days? I'd come down with a stomach bug and was given the clear to stay home by Dr. Fulkrug. You knew nothing about what would happen when the pill was taken? No tinkering or anything of that nature? No. Dr. Fulkrug, Larry, everyone at the site were friends. Maybe even family. I would never kill them. The two officers looked at each other. I could tell they were deciding what to think of what I'd said. Finally, they looked back at me. Son, if what you're saying is true, you might just be the luckiest man I've ever met. Thank you. Finally, I asked the question I'd been wanting to since the beginning. Who are you guys? You don't look like police, and I don't recognize the logo on your shoulders. The two looked at each other once again. The blonde one shrugged and stopped the recording. He looked at me and said, We are the Unnatural Occurrences Organization. You've never heard of us because we aren't supposed to be known. We don't stop the killers in the street, we stop the monsters in your closet. We're a government organization dedicated to the containment and, in some instances, eradication of items or entities that deny all logic. A stillness filled the air. It was a lot to unpack. All the conspiracies I'd heard over the years. Were they real? I had so much I wanted to ask. But at that moment, only one thing came out. Like the Mothman? You object. 5473. Yes. It was terminated in 2014. Of course, now that you know all this, we will have to administer amnestics. The public can never learn about this. He began trying to pull something out of his suit, but the brown-haired one stopped him. Hang on, Scott. I think this guy could be a valuable asset to the organization. He has experience in the field of the human psyche. I think he could be an important member of the organization. That is, if you're up for it. I nodded my head immediately. I didn't want to forget about this. Not yet, at least. The agents pulled out another folder. Opening it, there was a paper on each side. One of the papers was a contract, and the other was a non-disclosure agreement. I signed both of them. Wonderful. We are happy to have you involved in our mission, Dr. Adams. The company will email you the details. We will give you time to mourn the loss of your colleagues and organize your affairs. And with that, they left. That was well over a year ago. So much has happened since then. I began work there the next Monday and was forced to relocate again to the nearest site in Iowa. I've had to cut ties with the world I once knew in favor of this new one. I've seen things. Things you would never believe. Creatures that do not seem like they should, yet do exist. Monstrous beasts. Creatures not even a child's nightmares could conjure up. I've also met numerous. Site 94 never reopened. The company as a whole collapsed shortly after. I never told another living soul outside the organization about what happened. What led me down this path what happened to me until now. I swore an oath of silence to never speak to the outside world of this. But things have changed. I got home 5 nights ago after a long day. There had been an accident and one of my closer colleagues was tragically killed. The cause I will not disclose out of respect. In my fatigued state, I thought I saw Jeff Harrison on the hill facing my house. I thought nothing of it, just a hurt mind playing tricks on its owner. Then last night, as I was heading to bed, I saw him. He was even closer to me this time. He was in my yard, visibly smiling. It's like he was a cardboard cutout or something. I'm writing this because the world needs to learn about what goes on in the shadows. I don't care what the organization does to me. I don't care if they kill me, ruin my life, or stop me from ever having another happy day again. I'm a dead man walking anyway. This is Weston Adams, signing off. And that was What Really Happened at Site 94 by Joss the Fang 5. Immediately I get Men in Black vibes out of this, right? Like the films and stuff, which is like a lot of fun, a bit silly, but like, oh, there's all kinds of crazy things that we're kind of doing, which is just fun, right? It's just a lot of fun. The fact they're trying to cure psychopaths, I mean, that's a crazy concept, isn't it? I mean, but then also, the situation that they caused, giving him essentially super strength, but he's still like insane. It's just unfortunate, isn't it? It's just unfortunate they went in with really good intentions, but it just didn't work out. It's a really fascinating story. I know I've really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. We'll see you for whatever's next. Take care. The Disappearing House. It's been about a month since we found out the truth about the town we grew up in. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I have to make myself scarce for what I'm about to do. But I think you, all of you, will understand. Here we go. The worst part of growing up in a small town is, of course, the boredom. I'm sure many of you who experienced a similar upbringing can reflect on the times when you desperately looked for something to do. We explored every inch of our neck in the woods, hoping and praying something interesting would happen. Hours are to be used, not counted, my grandmother would say, and shoo me and my cousin Billy out of the door. We'd mess around with the other latchkey kids and get into trouble, though I can't remember exactly what we did to pass the time. I've always had a bad memory. What I do remember vividly is the Davis Hills, which took you south into another town. There were 3 hills, all with a dirt road slapped on top of them. They were just dull mounds of dirt to most, but to us, it was a bootlegged roller coaster. My grandma would take the Davis Hills often, because she believed the grocery store in the adjacent city had cheaper eggs. Billy and I would beg her to take us so we could enjoy the ride. We'd pile into the front seat of my grandma's dusty Ford Ranger and giggle in glee when she would shift the car in neutral as we went speeding downhill. I still remember the feeling of my stomach dropping as we made the plunge from one hill to the next. Another amusing part of the ride was the disappearing house. When you reached the top of the first hill, you'd see a tiny red brick home that seemed to vanish when you got to the second. It would almost magically reappear at the third hill before slowly becoming invisible again as you left town. The house wasn't anything special. Even as a kid, I could tell it was even older than my grandparents' decrepit shack. But someone must have lived there, as the lawn was always cut, and 2 rows of Indian hawthorn shrubs created a natural pathway to the front door. But my grandma didn't know who lived in the home, much less if it was even owned by someone. I always found this odd, because my Nana knew every soul who lived in our dumpy village. I was something of a local celebrity. "Best stay away from there," she would say. "If I don't know them, they're a stranger. Do you boys hear me?" Still, Billy and I always had some sort of fascination with the house, and our friend group always dreamed about poking around the yard to determine who lived there. But we never did, and soon the house faded in our memories over time. I left town after high school and went to school as far north as I could, settled down in Brooklyn and became perfectly comfortable with being a drop in the ocean. I went back to my hometown twice. The first was when my grandfather passed shortly after I graduated from college. The second time was last month, when Nana finally kicked the bucket. It was a community event, with many residents helping Billy and me with the arrangements. Billy had also escaped and did quite well in the lumber industry 3 towns over. We were more different than ever, but still close like brothers. 2 latchkey kids whose parents were either dead or absent usually never stood a chance. And yet, we persevered. The whole village attended the funeral, and after the last few stragglers left my Nana's house, a couple of our childhood friends stayed behind for some late-night revelry. Billy built a fire in the backyard pit, and I tapped a keg of Miller. "To Nana," our friend Sean Norris said, "the people's grandma." "Hear, hear," we shouted in unison. "Sure is good to see y'all," Hank Wilson said. "What's it been, 10 years since we saw you both?" I nodded, looking at the other men who stayed behind. They looked more weathered and weary than Billy and me, worn down by decades of stagnation. I felt a twinge of guilt. Feels good to be back. I honestly missed this place. Billy shot me a puzzled look, but quickly masked it. Me and Sam appreciated the kind words at the service, Pastor Milton. Freddie Milton laughed and rolled his eyes. "You can call me Freddie, outside of the pulpit." I spoke up. Who would have thought old Freddie Milton would be the pastor at Mount Sinai? Same Freddie Milton who could shotgun a beer in 3 seconds. "Ha! I could say the same for y'all. Big City Sam working for mayor." He turned to Billy. "And I still can't believe Billy Burns is driving that fancy Cadillac parked out front." "I thought he'd be driving the short bus," Sean yelled in jest. We all laughed and stared at our beers for a bit. There was a brief moment of silence before Hank spoke. "Say, y'all remember taking the Davis Hills in your Nana's truck?" "Course I do," Billy said while smiling. "Hell, that was the most fun I had as a little kid." "Closest thing we had to an amusement park," Freddie added. "Your Nana really whipped that beater down them hills too." "Do y'all still take them?" "Nah, there isn't really a need anymore. I tried taking my kids down a while ago, but they were too glued to their phones to appreciate them," Hank said. "Kids these days have it easy. I can't remember all the times we got in trouble just to pass the time." "Remember that creepy house on the hills? How would it go invisible every time we went down those hills?" Sean asked. "Oh yeah," Freddie exclaimed. "I can't believe I forgot about that house. Who even lived there?" "Dunno," Billy shrugged. "Nana didn't know them, so they must have been trouble. We talked about snooping around that place. I remember all the stories we made up about who actually lived there." "I thought we did check it out," Sean said. "I don't think so. We always said we would, but I think we chickened out." "No, I swear we went there. Billy, you, and Sam were definitely there. Hell, all of us were. Hank, Freddie, and what was that kid's name? Kevin, Kyle, Kenny. Yeah, Kenny Doyle." "What the hell are you talking about, Sean?" "Who's Kenny Doyle?" "Kenny, you had to have remembered him. He had a lazy eye and kept his hair spiked up. He was a total oddball dude." "Oh yeah, now I remember," Freddie said. "His pops was the janitor at the church. Odd family. Didn't he move before we started middle school?" I don't know." "Hold it, guys. I have no idea who you're talking about. We never went into that house." "I swear we did. The door was unlocked and we went into the living room. There was an old TV, an antique chair, a record player, and a weirdly small door, like only a kid could go in it." Sean trailed off before he stopped talking altogether with a concerned look on his face. "Well, what happened after that?" Billy spoke up, but his face had grown white. I remember now. A lady lived there and offered us some cookies and... Oh God. Are y'all fucking with me? Billy, what are you talking about? Hey, where are you going?" Billy had thrown his beer down and was hightailing it to his Cadillac. We chased after him, trying to get him to stop because he was too drunk to drive. I hopped in Hank's truck and sped after him. The only light we saw was from his red taillights. I knew where he was going. We approached the first hill, and I swear, as we zoomed down it, I felt a wave of euphoria, followed by an intense sense of dread. Memories poured into my head, and as we leapt out of the truck and tore after Billy into the now abandoned, disappearing house, I suddenly realized we had been here before. It was the summer before middle school. Kenny Doyle was a pariah amongst the other kids. He was jittery, prone to anger, and would throw uncontrollable tantrums when we were in grade school. Hell, every time we saw him, he was in the principal's office. Usually we avoided him, but that summer, Billy and I were in the same vacation Bible school group with Kenny. The disappearing house came up as a topic of discussion, and Kenny was adamant about checking it out. "We should ding-dong ditch it," he yelled while clasping his hands together. Billy and I were always down for some revelry and gathered the usual suspects. We snuck out on our bikes and met the other boys about an hour after sunset, laughing in glee as we zoomed down the first hill. Kenny crept up the walkway and banged on the door while ringing the bell. As we zoomed back to our bikes, the front door flew open with such force that I tripped and fell from being so startled. A tall woman, who must have been in her mid to late 30s, appeared in the doorway. She had her dark brown hair in a bun and wore a red checkered apron. She shook her head and grinned, showing a mouth of shining white teeth. "Boys causing trouble," she said in a firm yet soothing voice. "Okay, come on in. It's about to rain and I'm baking cookies." I looked to Billy, who shrugged and then stepped inside. The rest of us followed behind into darkness. "My name is Miss Hattie, by the way." Hank swerved into the front yard, where Billy was on the ground, rocking back and forth like a madman. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and his face pale. "Sam," he sputtered in almost a whisper. "I remember everything." Billy then leaped to his feet and barreled toward the front door. "It should have been me!" he screamed while sprinting. "Billy, wait!" Sean cried out as Billy thrust his shoulder to try and open the boarded-up front door. I went after him, but after one more push, Billy breached the door and fell headfirst into the house. As he did, I felt a wave of nausea and collapsed as more memories piled in. "Kenny, what did we do to you?" "Take a bite of these. They're not as good as your Nana's, but they'll do the job." "You know our Nana?" "Why, of course I do, Billy Burns. Everyone in this whole town knows your Nana." "Well, she doesn't know you." "Oh, she's just being coy, Sam. Your Nana and I go way back. She and her friends used to play around my house all the time when they were your age." "Huh, you don't look that old." "Well, the Lord has been good to me. What can I say?" "Well, I guess we should be going. Thank you for the cookies. They were awfully good." "Oh, no. I can't let y'all bike back in this rain and track mud all over your Nana's house. She'd have a hissy fit. Say, would you boys like to meet my very special friend?" I remember trying to get Billy and the other guys to leave, but strangely found myself sitting next to them Indian style on the plush shag carpet. Miss Hattie stood in front of the tiny living room door and looked at us one by one. She smiled broadly, but I noticed no warmth behind her saucer-like blue eyes. "Okay, boys. Behind this door is my special friend. She'll choose a lucky winner who will receive a wonderful prize. Does anyone want to go first?" "I do," Hank replied. "Well, excellent. Let's see if young Henry is the winner. Henry, crawl on over and knock on my friend's door." Hank shuffled to the tiny door and carefully knocked. Miss Hattie bent down and put her ear to the door, listening patiently while the rest of us looked at each other with confusion. "Nope." "Oh well, better luck next time." Hank shrugged and sat back down next to us. "I'll go next." "Excellent, Freddy. I'm sure my friend will want to meet the preacher's son." Freddy knocked on the door, but nothing happened again. "Oh darn," Miss Hattie exclaimed. "I guess my friend is a little shy today. Mr. Norris, why don't you go next, young man?" Sean knocked on the door, but was denied. "Fiddlesticks. What is going on with her today, huh?" Miss Hattie put her hands on her hips and then smiled at me. "Samuel Burns, I believe it's your turn." I waddled over to the door and softly knocked on it, but like the rest, nothing happened. "Well, she surely has to pick one of you. Billy?" Billy hunched over, his left hand fingers crossed behind his back, and his eyes closed. He knocked on the door and put his ear against it to listen. His eyes grew wide, and he turned to look at me. But before he could speak, the door rattled, and we heard 3 loud knocks that seemed to be coming from the other side. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up in excitement. "Well, would you look at that?" Miss Hattie gleefully shouted. "Billy is our winner. Yay, Billy! Go ahead and open the door to meet my friend." "Wait a minute," Kenny yelled. "I didn't get to go." Miss Hattie stopped talking and slowly turned her head to face Kenny. Her permagrin had now shifted into a sour frown. "Excuse me," she said with thinly veiled contempt. "I said," Kenny began with his hands on his hips, "I didn't have a turn. My special friend only chooses one winner, Mr. Doyle." "But I didn't get to go. That's not fair." "Well, sweetie, sometimes life isn't fair." "No, I get a turn. This always happens to me. Everyone always does this to me when I didn't do nothing wrong. Why won't you give me a turn, lady? I don't even want the prize. I just want a goddamn turn." Miss Hattie stood unfazed during Kenny's rant before smiling at the huffing boy, his fists balled up and tears in his eyes. "Oh, Mr. Doyle, what have they done to you?" she said, but her voice sounded darker and appeared to echo through the house. "Come now," she said while extending her hand to Kenny. She led Kenny over to the door and patted the back of his head while he happily knocked on it. There was a brief moment of silence before the door softly began to shake, and the sound of a lock being turned ripped through the house. Miss Hattie began to giggle and opened the door. We looked inside but only saw darkness. "Go inside, Kenny. It's rude to keep my friend waiting." Kenny smiled, got down on his knees, and disappeared. Miss Hattie closed the door behind him, and the door locked behind him. The next thing we heard was screaming. Sean ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The screaming continued, becoming loud shrieks while the rest of us begged Miss Hattie to let him out. Miss Hattie stood impassively and ignored our pleas until Kenny went silent. Miss Hattie's eyes rolled back into her head as if she became possessed, and a disembodied voice thundered from her mouth. "Leave this place!" We scrambled out of the front door and shakily hopped on our bikes, pedaling up the hills, not even noticing the events of that night seemed to vanish from our minds as the house disappeared behind the hills. I remember waking up with a headache and being pestered by my grandma about whether we had hung out with Kenny Doyle last night, because he hadn't come home. The whole town launched a search. I remember volunteering with the other guys to help look for him in the forest, not realizing Kenny was less than a mile away. How could I have forgotten? "Billy, come on, man. Where are you? We can't be in here." Sean screamed at Billy. Hank fumbled in the back seat of his truck before turning on a jacklight and illuminating the living room. Even through all the dirt and dust, the room looked untouched from when we last saw it. Billy was sitting on the ground before the small door, muttering softly to himself. "Billy?" I said softly. "I remember everything too, okay? We have to go." Billy shook his head. "You don't remember everything. You don't know." "Don't know what?" "That I was chosen. I was supposed to go through that door. I remember, I finally do. But Kenny took your place instead. You got lucky that— No! You don't understand. You what?" I heard a voice coming from the other side of the door. It sounded like my mom's. "Your mom's? What?" It didn't make any sense. Billy's mother, my Aunt Julie, had already been dead for over 5 years when we first visited the house. "I don't know, man. I swear it was her. She was calling for help. She seemed to be in trouble. I have to see." "I have to see what?" But before I got an answer, Billy darted to the small door and banged on it. Chaos ensued as the rest of us lunged forward to grab him, and we tried to drag him out of the house. Just as we were about to reach the front doorway, we heard it. 3 knocks. We fled back to my Nana's house, frantically trying to make sense of what happened all those years ago. But after some discussion and more alcohol, we decided to just move on with all of our lives. After all, who would believe us anyway? I flew back to New York and settled into my regular routine until I got a phone call from Billy's wife, Melissa. He was missing. They found him the night before I planned to return to help with the search, though I already knew where he was. I remember being numb as an investigator asked me why Billy would have ventured into this abandoned house and entered its crawl space, even though it could only fit a small child. I helped Melissa with the funeral and watched as the other guys avoided me at the service. Melissa couldn't understand why Billy did what he did, though she noted that he had been acting strangely in the events leading up to his death. We still haven't really been able to grieve. I have to take care of a few things first. And so now I'm here, standing outside this decrepit shack, with a bottle of Lone Star filled with gasoline and an old wash rag. I light a match and then hurry back to my rental car, taking the hills back to Nana's and watching in the rearview mirror as the house disappears, hopefully for good. But as I drive down the last of the Davis Hills, the memories remain. And that was The Disappearing House by Araya Yahem. This story is awesome. It's got just this incredible level of bizarreness and confusing, weird mystery, kind of Twilight Zone effects, and it's oh, I mean it's just awesome. It's just so awesome. Eerie things that happen in small communities and everything. I mean this house is like, what is going on? You know what I mean? Like, so you got like the creepy lady anyway that like nobody seems to really know. She's got a weird tiny door which her special friend only will allow like one lucky winner. It's all just weird, and obviously like these people must die, but then some people can lose their memories about it. Oh, it's another great story. Honestly, there are some really really good stories out there, and I'm so glad I have this fantastic opportunity to find them and to read them to you and to share them with you, because some of these are just so good, man. This was yet another just fantastic story. I'm so glad I got to read it. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I sure did. We'll see you for whatever's next. You take care.